We're live and ready to begin at 9 a.m.
Hey, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Hope everyone's basement is okay after all that rain we had since the last meeting.
Just a reminder again to all participants that we're currently live.
Good morning, everyone. As chair of the Redistricting Process Committee, I call this meeting of the Michigan Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission to order at 9 a.m. on June 28th, 2021. This Zoom webinar is being live streamed to YouTube. For anyone in the public watching who would prefer to watch via a different platform than they currently are using, please visit our social media at Redistricting Michigan or Redistricting MI to find the link for either viewing on YouTube. Our live stream today includes closed captioning. We have ASL interpretation available for this meeting. If you are a member of the public watching who would like easier viewing options for the ASL interpreter on your screen, please email us at redistrictingmichigan.gov and we will provide you with additional viewing options. Similarly, members of the public who would like to access translation services during the webinar can email us at redistricting@michigan.gov for details on how to access language translation services for this meeting. Translation services are available for both Spanish and Arabic. Please email us and we will provide you with a unique link and call-in information. This meeting is being recorded and will be available at www.michigan.gov/MICRC for viewing at a later date. This meeting is also being transcribed and those transcriptions will be made available along with public comment. Members of the media who may have questions before, during, or after the meeting should direct those questions to Edward Woods III, Communications and Outreach Director for the Commission at woodse3@michigan.gov or 517-331-6309. For the purposes of the public watching and the public record, I will turn to the Michigan Department of State staff to take note of the commissioners present.
Hello, commissioners. For the public record, I just wanted to add that translation services are also available in Bengali. I'll now proceed with calling the roll. Commissioners, please say present when I call your name, and please also indicate where you are attending the meeting remotely from by stating either the county, city, township, or village and the state from which you are attending the meeting remotely. I'll start with Doug Clark.
Present.
Commissioner Clark, can you add where you are attending the meeting remotely from?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I am attending the meeting remotely from Rochester Hills, Michigan.
Thank you. Anthony Eade.
Good morning. Present, remotely attending from Detroit, Michigan.
Thank you, Commissioner Eade. Rhonda Lang.
Present, attending remotely from Reed City, Michigan.
Thank you, Commissioner Lang. And Dustin Witches.
I am present and I am attending remotely from Howell, Michigan.
Thank you. All commissioners are present.
Okay, I'll now look favorably on a motion to approve the meeting agenda. And also the meeting agenda is posted online at redistrictingmichigan.org for the public watching.
Yeah, I'll move to approve the agenda.
I'll second it.
Okay. Motion to approve the meeting agenda has been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor of adopting the meeting agenda, please raise your right hand and say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, raise your right hand and say nay. Motion carries. And the agenda is adopted. Okay, we will now move on to public comment. A few notes about public comment for those of you who are joining us for the first time. Because this is a virtual meeting, members of the public have to sign up in advance to address the commission. Staff at the Department of State will unmute each member of the public for up to 2 minutes on a first come, first serve basis. This means members of the public will be called on in the order in which they signed up to address the commission. To those members of the public participating in public comment, please note that you will have no more than 2 minutes to address the commission this morning. You can also submit your thoughts to the commission and the public by emailing redistricting@michigan.gov. Your written comment and public comment will be included in the online meeting archive for the commission. Public comment sign-up links are also posted at Redistricting Michigan and on our social media pages on Facebook and Twitter at Redistricting Michigan. I'd like to recognize Sarah Reinhardt from the Michigan Department of State, who will call on members of the public to address the commission.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Our first public comment participant is a Mr. James Gallant. Please give me 1 moment to unmute you.
Can you hear me, Mr. Chair?
I sure can. Go ahead.
All righty. Thank you very much. My name is James Gallant with the Marquette County Suicide Prevention Coalition, and I signed up for 2 public comments at today's meeting. And in my personal opinion, I believe that the process that we are witnessing here is going to be considered institutionalized bullying. I'm coining that phrase. It appears that Commissioner Witches is bullying the committee members by overstepping his authority when he repeatedly assigned and will continue to assign the floor for deliberation and debate without the required motion and second establishing an immediately pending question for Mr. Brace and the others to consider under the current Robert's Rules of Order, which have been approved in the Rules of Procedure. Remember that the approved decorum at this meeting requires that all comments be germane to the immediately pending question. So it appears that Mr. Brace and the others have not heeded his own advice. It appears that you all have painted yourself into the corner when it comes to these rules. It's like you don't acknowledge the rules and now you're off into some corner and now you got to come back and actually approve the maps according to the rules. We're talking about fairness, right? Fairness and equity. This racial equity and all this equity, it only starts when you're following the rules. Now, I believe that it was Mr. Richardville that was the one that was accused of not following the rules back in 2011. And now you folks, what, different group of people, still not following the rules. And if you could give me the minutes and the rules of procedure for that 2011 group, we could show very clearly in the minutes if they follow the rules or not. And please, anybody here that is supposedly representing a political party, please acknowledge your level of affiliation, whether you're a voting member or not, because to be affiliated with a member organization in this context, you pretty much got to be a member, a voting member, that you actually signed up to be a member. And that's not really clear. So that would disqualify some members here if you're not actually a member of the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, because that's a specific membership organization under the context of this Constitution. And I would please ask, and the guy that talked on Friday about he was there in Arizona and the 2001, they breached the Constitution there too. They elected a temporary chair, just like you did here. And then all of a sudden, every next chair gets to make up his own rules. As
Your
if
time
you
has
have
expired.
autonomy.
Please conclude your sentence.
I'm finishing my sentence, please. Mr. Chair, can I finish my sentence?
Yep, please finish your sentence.
Okay, that's what I'm saying, is that it appears that this commission, the initial breach of this commission was when the Secretary of State did not elect a chair at the first meeting. He elected a temporary chair, just like you did here. And then all of a sudden, every next chair appears to believe that they can just make up their own rules, as if you can, provide your own rules as the next chair. And you cannot.
That would have been the end of your sentence, Mr. Glenn. Thank you.
That concludes our public comment.
All right, thank you. Without objection at this point, we can move on to new business. Seeing none, we'll move on to new business, which 5A, questions and fact finding with election data services and our our VRA legal counsel, Bruce Adelson, and our RPV analyst. Okay.
Hey, Dustin, didn't you say we had 2 public comments?
Sarah, he did mention that he signed up twice, but I believe you mentioned that he only did once. Is that still correct? Okay. Alrighty. Okay, so I believe Mr. Brace, you had a quick 5-minute little presentation to do real quick, and then we'll move on to our questions.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Let me share my screen. I've put together some data for you to consider and be cognizant of. Can you see my screen right now? All right, good. Let me do the full one. Okay, I'm going to talk just a couple of minutes about some redistricting data, the racial data that we have. On Friday or last Thursday, I talked a little bit about a bunch about the racial composition of the population in Michigan, but I mistakenly showed only the change in the racial category data with the maps that I was showing last Thursday. Instead, what we want to look at where the concentrations are. And so we've looked at and created a new set of maps that includes data down to the township level for the state. In the course of normal business, we've created a majority map that shows in solid colors the various racial groups that are more than 50% of the population, and real solid of more than 75% of the population. And then in a crosshatch where there is plurality. This is down at the township level for the state and down to the census tract level for the metro insert, so that we can see the African-American populations in red. There are some Hispanic concentrations in lower Detroit area. But when you look across the state, it's mostly white population. But we can look at where there are concentrations by different percentages. This is the non-Hispanic white category. If you remember our discussions last week, we are showing non-Hispanic race information. So to show upwards of 100%. And you can see where certainly 90 to 100%, there's a lot of territory up in the upper part of the state for white. For the African-American population, again, non-Hispanic African-American, the highest census tract in the state is 91.4%. You can see that in the upper right in the legend, but we can see where there are concentrations. Certainly down in the Detroit area for the African-American, but in a number of other areas, you can see that down at the township level. We look at then the Hispanic population, also covered by the Voting Rights Act, and we can see concentrations southern part of Detroit, Wayne County, but also out to the western side of the state. There's a good bit of Hispanic concentrations out there. So something to keep in mind as we look at the Voting Rights Act. The Asian population, that is also covered by the Voting Rights Act. There are concentrations outside of the city of Detroit, with the exception of Hamtramck, down in the middle. That's one of the higher concentrations of the Asian population. So we can see where they are located. And finally, with the Native American population, it's mostly up in the UP, it looks like, from the census data. This is again the ACS data, the 5-year data from 2019. But we also can look at more than just Voting Rights Act data, and we can have access to, in the American Community Survey, we have access to ancestry information. So here is the question that was asked of me last week. Where is the Arab ancestry? And where is that concentrated? Certainly you can see down in the metro area where some of that concentration is. But that's mainly where the Arab concentration is. Of course, the Dutch out in Holland, logically, I guess, out in the West Coast, where the Dutch population is concentrated. Again, only highest number is 38% by census tract in the state, but it does give some idea of where that's located. German population, that's another high concentration. That's 5.3% statewide, but the highest concentration is 42%, mainly up in the thumb area on that side. And the other large concentration is Irish ancestry, but they're scattered. It's only 2.2%, and the highest concentration is 14% up here on the island, I think, as I recall. And then the final ancestry is the Polish community. Where are they located? So we can see some information on that side. These, again, are not required by the Voting Rights Act, but we have additional information on ancestry that can help guide us as we look towards some of these areas. So with that, that is kind of a look at some of the data, and I'll turn it back over to the chairman and our discussion on VRA. Unless there's any questions, of course.
Any questions for Mr. Brace from anyone?
Not a question, Mr. Brace, but that's very informative. Can you send out these updated maps to us when you get a chance?
Indeed, I will. I will send them to Sue, and we'll put them up on your web and send them out to each of the commissioners.
Okay. All right, so we'll go ahead and move on to our Voting Rights Act questions that we have at this particular point in time. Now, I think we have 4 specific ones. In the interest of just time, does anyone in particular of us 3 or 4 want to ask those particular questions to Bruce? Don't be shy.
Yeah, I can ask them. We're talking about the ones that are on the agenda, correct?
No, they're on it's in a Word document.
Oh, I got it. I got it.
And at the very bottom, there are 4 that are specifically based on race
Yep.
VRA questions. So
Cool.
once you have that up, go ahead with number 1, and then we'll have a discussion on every single one after that if any questions exist based on the answer, and then we'll move on to the second question, so on and so forth, like we've done in the past, and then that'll allow us all to write things down. So
Gotcha.
Commissioner Eid, when you're ready, please go ahead.
All righty. Mr. Edelson, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. We got a few questions specifically regarding VRA. I guess the first one is a little bit more of a general question. We've spoken a lot about documentation of like the decision-making process, so that when we're done with our work, there's a clear understanding of why we made the decisions that we made. So I'm just wondering if you could provide some suggestions on how to actually go through that documentation.
Sure. We can start with that. And then part of my answer, I think, is also going to dovetail with the answer to number 2. I think the biggest, most important time for documenting your decision-making process is as you're about to approve your official draft map. You go out for public comment, and then if there are any changes that are made to your draft map before the final map. That was something that we focused on in Arizona. We did make changes to the draft map after the additional public comment period, and also after the lawyers looked at things more, crunched some more numbers, did some more analysis, and suggested some specific changes. So all of that was very well documented. The commission really started right from the first with documenting, as you may recall from some of the documents that I submitted when I submitted my bid. We documented everything. In particular, you'll be, whether you start from scratch or whether you tinker with the existing districts, you will be creating districts, modifying districts that are made up of constituent parts of other districts. And when I did my race and redistricting presentation for you, we talked a lot about how some districts are more than what numbers may appear. Well, the understanding how they voting their level of compliance with the act, state law, the Constitution depends on additional analysis. So explaining why you are creating districts by using parts of others, I think it's not as if that you must document every conversation that you have or every meeting that you have in great detail. It's more to the point of, why did you make this change? What was your strategy in doing that? I'm sorry that I'm seeing that my audio is unstable. If you don't, that if things stabilize a bit, because we've had some rocky, that may be part of it. So I think documentation is something that we're going to be talking more about, and the understanding that why you make certain specific changes. Why do you use parts of districts 3 and 4, the new district 2? Why did you do that? What analysis do you have that supports that? So in essence, at least from my standpoint today, at the very beginning, that would be one of the things that I would be focusing
on. How did y'all format like the record of that decision-making process? Was it just like a Word document? Was it a PDF, or was it actually in the redistricting software that you guys used in the past?
Well, in a way, it's all of that. We had Word documents, PDFs, spreadsheets. And one of the things that we did very early on in working with the mapping consultant is discuss exactly what information the commission wanted to see on the screen as the commission was doing the mapping. I think I alluded to this a couple of weeks ago. The racial population of each district, the partisan voter registration, CVAP, voting age population overall, some pertinent results. You see the extent of writing. So all of that is displayed in real time where the commission met. So the commission could look at, well, if we do this, if we put this town here, if we keep the city in this district, well, what does that mean for the Voting Rights Act? What does that mean for constitutional compliance? So we had multiple formats and also real-time information on spend a lot of time talking to the mapping consultant. In fact, one of the things I was thinking about before this meeting, I recall I met with the mapping consultant at the direction of the commission, in particular the chairwoman at the commission, at the mapping consultant's office in DC, to go through what information do you have, what information is being provided in a way with, all based on go out to Arizona, for example. They were already had everything the commission wanted, everything the chair requested. So they were ready to go in real time. And that was immensely helpful.
Bruce, you kind of broke up there for a second.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The last thing I heard, well, it's okay. Look, the last thing I heard was DC.
Yeah, I met with the mapping consultant 10 years ago at an office in DC. So the commission and the chair requested that I go to the mapping consultant's office to see how they were. Commission requested race, age, election, polarization, voter registration by party. Time was going to be looking at as the commission made decisions about what to include and what we not include. Okay, so I see something from Sarah. I recommend we dial you in for audio. So you can call my cell phone number, 301-873-4332. I'm sorry, we're having some weather issues here. That must be affecting the connectivity.
Commissioner Clark.
Yeah, Bruce, I understand the need for the documentation. Now, there's documentation that we're going to need as a commission among the discussions among us, our 13 of us. But there's also documentation that you have based on your analysis. Do you keep copies of that and have your own repository of that? I know you're going to share that data with us, but do you?
Right. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm interested in whether you have your own repository of everything that you do, and then at some point in time that's transferred over to us for historical purposes.
Well, I think that, the historical purposes, if that's something that to do at the end, sure, to the extent that none of the work that I'm providing is attorney-client privilege, which I'm very conscious of. I don't want to waive your privilege by providing documents publicly that should be confidential. But whatever work that, one of the things that I do with all my redistricting clients, and that I'm doing now with other clients with election analysis, for example. So as I do analysis, come to conclusions, have opinions, legal opinions, and I share them, of course, with my clients. Same thing would be true here. If you ask me to do a particular analysis, look at a particular court decision, whatever the question is, absolutely. When I prepare my analysis and give my opinion in whatever format that you want, then I share that with you. And that's one of the examples of that is the one person, one vote population deviation memo that I wrote for you. That I did that in response to something I had heard at one of the meetings or the hearings, I don't recall, to give you a little foundation and framework for, well, what does one person, one vote mean? And I know you've heard with population deviations, 1% for congressional, 10% for state districts. What does that mean? So that was a big issue in Arizona. That was the issue they took us to the Supreme Court on. So I thought that having some basic information now to go along with what I did for you for the redistricting and race would give you a good basic handle on at least some of the issues that are facing you.
Okay. Let me ask you this. If we put together a district, and then do you analyze that and come back with recommendations?
Well,
and then we may, then at some point we may tweak that. Do you come back again?
Well, as many times as you decide to tweak something, particularly certainly with the Voting Rights Act issues, but also for one person, one vote, yes. Now, a lot of the analysis that I've done with redistricting commissions and with Arizona is in real time, that I can make a real time conclusion, come to an opinion by seeing exactly what you're doing. So, you know, an example would be, and we talked about this during my program, that if you have a 70% minority population in one district, I know Lisa and I would be talking about, well, what percentage is needed so that minorities can elect their candidates of choice. And if you put in more than that, then that's something that we would talk about. That's just a very obvious example that regularly comes up in redistricting.
And then would you document that as part of your documentation?
I mean, about the opinion that I give you?
Yeah, if it's real time.
Yeah, in real, I can and print it out.
You're breaking up.
My opinion is part of the record. You know what I can do if you want, I can call, if you give me a couple of minutes, I can call in on a landline, and that might be more stable than what's happening now. So would you like me to do that?
Yeah, I think that'd be best.
Okay, so why don't I'm gonna stop the video, mute myself, and I will be back in a moment.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
while we're waiting, I'd like to know if Dr. Hanley has anything to add to that topic we were on.
Dr. Handley.
I do. I am going to do a very lengthy analysis, and what I will produce at the end of this analysis is a lengthy report, and it will outline all of the contests that I've analyzed. It will indicate things like what the percent minority is that I think is going to be needed in some areas. It will identify contests that can be used as bellwether contests. So a lot of this information will be in my report, and I will also be available to, as you draw, determine analytically with data whether you have an effective district or not. If you're talking about something like a minority district, not if you're talking about things like communities of interest, and whether you have a district that would elect, say, a candidate preferred by Arab Americans. That's not going to be part of my analysis, but anything to do with the racial Black voting analysis, that's what I do, is a lot of analysis for the state, for particular areas of the state, and when you're drawing for the districts that you're drawing.
So same question that I had for Bruce. We develop a district, you'll give us your analysis at that point in time. And then if we tweak it, you'll give us your analysis again, real time?
That's correct. Now,
Okay.
actually, some of this, the redistricting software is going to be giving you real time. So for example, if I say something like, in this particular area, I think you probably need a district that's, say, at least 49% Black and voting age population. And I've determined that these couple of contests are bellwether contests, and you're going to want to make sure that these candidates of choice, that the election returns indicate that those candidates will win. So some of this you'll know as you're drawing. You'll know if you've made the district sufficiently minority, and you'll know if the candidates that I've pointed out as bellwether candidates have carried that district. Now, there's a little more to it than that, but that is sort of a very quick way for you to know real time what's going on.
Now, going back to the original question that Anthony brought forward, do you document all those items as we progress through the process? You personally document them into your own repository so that they're available at some other date?
Yes, as I said, I mean, there will be a written report that I produce that will be given to you for part of your record. I mean, sometimes you can actually get the results of the analysis. In other words, the statistical results of the analysis. We can talk about whether you want that as well as the written report, but you will have.
If you would analyze those statistical results and give us a recommendation, is that recommendation documented on your side?
Yes.
Okay. So, okay. And then at some point in time, we get the hard copy of those or whatever we need to store our archives at some point. Okay.
The written report you would actually get well, hopefully, depending on when I get the data to do the analysis, you would have the written report, the major written report prior to drawing.
Okay. Yeah, I'm looking at it from a documentation standpoint from Anthony's original question. Good. So what my understanding is both you and Bruce document your recommendations and your analysis on your own, keep them in your own repositories, and at some point in time, we get a summary of that or the full copy of all that. But real time when we're doing our work, you'll give us the recommendations at that point. Okay.
That's correct.
Okay, that's the end of my questions.
Director Hammersmith.
Yes, you mentioned as soon as you get the data. So the data is do you need the tabulated legacy data, the September 30 census data? Please clarify what data that you need in order to progress. Thank you.
General Counsel.
My question was different, Mr. Chair, if Dr. Hanley wanted to respond.
Oh, okay. All right. We'll come back to you.
So there are two pieces of information that I need to do an analysis. And that is, I need to know the demographic composition of the election precincts, and I need the election results for those precincts. And these are in two different places. And it's even a little more complicated than that, but I will need the election results. And that usually comes from the Secretary of State's office, but I'm not sure in this case. Kim probably has been tracing this. In terms of the demographics of the precincts, if I'm looking at contests that occurred before 2015, the PL 2010 data, the Census PL 2010 data is the data that I would use. Unfortunately, for the elections from about 2016 on, I would need the PL data yet to be released. So these are the pieces of information that go into this. Now I know that we have the PL 2010 data. I suspect we don't have the precinct boundaries for that data for the elections that we're interested in, or if we have, that we're just beginning to work on those, because we need to match the 2010 PL data with the precincts in which the 2012 and 2014 elections occurred. So that's the first piece. That's a piece that can occur prior to the release of the 2020 PL data, but hopefully it will be up and ready to go the minute the 2020 data comes out, because that's when I can begin my analysis of more recent contests. We have some ways around that. We could use, there are various sources of estimated data. I think EDS has put together in the redistricting package, the 2 sources of estimates of the racial composition of precincts. Less than reliable. And there's even a more complicated way of doing this, and that is to use what's called a census surname registration that comes off of the voter registration. You look at surnames and identify the race of the surnames. This is much more popular in places like California, where you have a higher probability of guessing correctly because you have Hispanics and Asians. It's less accurate when your primary race of interest is African American.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, this Kim Brace, let me add to what Lisa has been talking about and Doug has been talking about also, or Bruce has been talking about. We have the racial components that we're pulling in, both the 2010 data and supplementary data, like the stuff that I've shown you already in terms of the maps that we showed. So we're trying to pull together the appropriate data that Lisa is looking at and looking to look at. We have the precinct boundaries that the state generated. We're evaluating those right now. And then we are evaluating the connection between the boundaries and the election results themselves, and making sure that those election results are adequately provided for in conjunction with those boundaries. So that is the data set that we're working on right now in building. We're getting continual data from the Secretary of State's office. I was uploading things from FTP sites over the weekend and all of that, so that we're trying to get everything there. One of the other pieces, though, that Lisa is going to need, which we haven't talked about, is the identification, the racial identification of the candidates that were on the ballot. Because from her standpoint, she's looking to see where there are African-American candidates or Hispanic candidates or Asian candidates in various contests. And the issue will be is being able to identify those. And so that's where some detective work will need to take place.
And doing a racial.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, in doing a racial block voting analysis, the courts have indicated that contests that include minority candidates are far more probative than contests that do not. And that's why we have to identify the race of the candidates run. Because I'd always want to begin with, and if possible, even contain my analysis to election contests that include minority candidates.
General Counsel, did you have something? I saw your hand came back down.
I didn't. I apologize for backtracking slightly, but I did want to note for the benefit of the public that the consultant records per the contract, those are all commission records and subject to our records retention protocols. So I know what Commissioner Clark and the committee is doing right now is finding out kind of how it fits into the work process flow. But I did just want to make the general clarification that all of the records are commission property and will be retained and used accordingly. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Anything else on documentation decisions that we're making, or are we ready to move on to the next question?
Could I
Go ahead.
interject just briefly?
Yeah, please.
Can you hear me better?
Yep, sure can.
Okay, good. One of the issues that we're talking about documentation as part of the Voting Rights Act Section 2 analysis is having historical information about discrimination in Michigan historically, the history of voter discrimination in particular. That's not something that I'm aware. There may be some prior studies and analyses of that I'm not aware of, but that's also part of the record, and it's also part of making determinations about Section 2, whether or not the so-called jingles factors have been or present. So having historical information of discrimination and also voting discrimination. In other states, these types of studies, analyses are perhaps more prevalent than they are in Michigan. I know in Arizona, for example, we were able to rely on a lot of existing histories, documentation, to get moving pretty quickly without having to do additional analyses. You know, I had pointed out when I was with you a couple of weeks ago, the USA versus City of East Point decision. So that gives us some framework of current voting-related discrimination, at least in the City of East Point, which is important. So having additional history of discrimination and history of voting discrimination is also part of the documentation you'll need.
I did have a quick question. I didn't know if this would be an appropriate time to ask it. I know, Mr. Brace, you were going to say something too, and feel free to rope this into it. Just in regards to documentation itself of what it is that we're doing. I know that each commissioner is technically able to draw their own map and submit one map of each kind, whether it's House, Senate, or congressional. And I'm assuming we'd be able to work in the software at that particular point to do and make our own maps at that point to play around with the numbers. All of us be able to do that if we so choose to. My question is, do we need to be documenting the things that we're doing individually if we so choose to work individually, or either like at home, for example, when we're not in a big giant body just looking at things and testing things out for our own behalf? Or is this documentation more along the final maps that we're going to be creating at this particular point?
Good questions. If I can take some first cut on some of that. Certainly from the standpoint of the software, you will see on the screen immediate changes as you draw and move a piece of territory from one district to another. That will appear on the screen both graphically with colorization as well as numeric down on the spreadsheet at the bottom of the page. Therefore, certainly one big suggestion is making sure that this information and these exercises are videotaped. They are part of your YouTube channel as we're online and that sort of thing. So you will have all of that, and in real time, you'll be able to see what it is on the screen and what it is in terms of the spreadsheet. Now, to your question, Commissioner, in terms of your individual machines, that is another very good question. And I would defer to both Sue and Julianne in terms of that. I think it's something that certainly should be on the topic area for discussion. and consideration by the commission as part of the issue of what do you have on your systems at home? Because that is there. Certainly on your home machines, if you have the full Autobahn Edge, you would have all of the steps that you were going through as you were drawing. And those are recorded, as I said before, in the system itself, in the software system. So saving your hard drive portions of that component would be what would be needed for your own machines if you're drawing on your machines. So those are the kind of component pieces that we're talking about.
Got it.
And if I could add just briefly, and I think this is something that I'd like to talk now with Julianne about what's discoverable in a litigation. I mean, I've seen all kinds of records of both individuals and the records of a body that are discoverable. I think that's something that Julianne and I could talk about in additional detail. In my experience with commissions, if commissioners, which I certainly expect may happen with you all as well. If you do work on your own, you bring the work to the commission to discuss, to explain what work you have been doing. So you're bringing your work to the body, which of course then is part of the body's record. But as far as additional from a legal standpoint, what else should be preserved, maintained? That's something I look forward to discussing with Julianne, and certainly from a litigation perspective, because that has been at the top of my mind for quite some time, as it is really with all of my clients, is minimizing risk, looking forward, and seeing what may happen in the event of litigation. So thank you.
And I think it's safe to say that there was a saying many times in redistricting circles is be careful in terms of documentation, but make sure you've got your lawyer with you always. So certainly in terms of Bruce's advice and Julianne's advice, that's part of the key there.
Got it. All right, Commissioner Reed, I think we're ready to move on past documentation, unless anyone else has any kind of question or thought at this particular point. And keep in mind, we can always come back to it later on if we need to.
Okay, wonderful. So move on to number 2 then. And that's basically, what are your suggestions for the continuing education component for the commission in your respective area?
Well, that's continuing education that I provide to you.
You were really getting.
I'm sorry?
I believe so, yes.
Oh, okay. Well, you know, our interactions have been relatively short so far. I expect that that's going to change as we move forward. But among the things I'd like to do is I'd like to have a lengthy discussion with you where we're focusing on the legal requirements of redistricting beyond what we've talked about. That includes the Constitution, U.S. Constitution. That includes your state criteria and what they mean connected with each other and also connected to federal law. So I would recommend that we have a lengthy time together in person where we can discuss these issues in a interactive, consecutive format. I think that's something I did a lot of in Arizona. I do that with my other clients, so I would recommend that here. I know there's been discussion about my providing an implicit bias education program, and there's been talk about a specific date, so I don't know if that's been confirmed, but that would be something else. I think, too, just in having, you know, almost like a Q&A kind of discussion about what's that next step around the corner going to be like? What's going to be happening? How long will your meetings be? What will the real-time experiences be? And I think just getting even readier than you are and just having a greater appreciation for how much things are going to change, frankly, after the data are out and after everybody is crunching numbers and analyzing and making changes and taking suggestions from the public. So that would be a suggestion. Are there topics that you're particularly interested in that we have not discussed?
Well, I'm particularly interested in the bias program that you were speaking about a little while ago. I know that is a little bit more time intensive, and I believe our staff is trying to create time to have that. Does anyone have anything else?
I think this is, go ahead, Commissioner Clark.
Yeah, I think we almost have to define those things as we move forward. We just don't know what we don't know at this point. So as we confront certain topics or certain areas, we're going to have to ask and have you provide that guidance.
Well, I think, and I understand that, Commissioner Clark, I think that's a great point, and that's why I also bring up our having a lengthier time than what we have today and what we had when I was with you 2 weeks ago. There are a lot of issues, frankly, and there's one issue. I woke up pretty early this morning because I couldn't sleep with one thing I was thinking about, that I have watched your meetings and hearings pretty regularly, and they've been really interesting, dynamic, a lot of good information. What has struck me is that many people, as you know, are really focused on communities of interest, and that being a real priority. It's a high priority on your redistricting criteria. But coupled with that criteria in the same sentence is districts shall reflect the state's diverse population. Well, what does that mean? And how does that interact with racial gerrymandering, for example, the Voting Rights Act, and all kinds of other issues that we have not discussed? So that's something that I think is a very important topic to talk about. So your state criteria, how they interact with federal law, how they interact on their own. As we know, this is brand new in Michigan. These criteria are brand new. Not every state has a criterion for diversity, for example. But as I said, what does that mean? So that's something I think we can discuss with you as your attorney. I think we need to have a really fulsome, uninterrupted, lengthier conversation about these issues. So that's something that I really respectfully encourage, and hopefully that's something we can do before the end of the summer.
Dr. Handley.
I apologize because I haven't heard all of the meetings, and so I don't know what's going on. And relative to one topic that I'm worried about, and that is one of your priorities, redistricting priorities in the pyramid that I made the other day, is partisan fairness. And I'm unsure of whether you have thought about how you're going to do this. Political scientists have a variety of ways of measuring this, and I don't know if you've been thinking about this particular component. It falls below things like communities of interest, but way above things like compactness, for example. Have anybody given any thought? Are you thinking about this at all?
Thinking about it? Yes. Knowing how to go about doing what's in my head? No. Because we've been hearing a lot about people say, we want as many competitive districts as possible. So, in my mind, it's like, well, let's make it as close to 50-50 as possible. But that, of course, is going to be difficult to do. So, and again, I'm not an expert in this area. I was just thinking about it in very simplistic kind of terms. Commissioner Lang.
I've thought about it a lot. And then when I think about the political fairness, then I think about the constituent fairness. There's been different public comment about joining like rural with urban. And, you know, when we look at communities of interest and, you know, here's where the lines start to blur for me from political fairness and being fair to people. And when you say the, you know, one voice, one vote, having it all correlate together, it just, I don't even know how it's going to all correlate together, honestly. But the political fairness, yes, I definitely have thought about, because you can look at a map of Michigan and the voting history of Michigan, which I've gone back myself and looked at like 2016 and 2012 election maps. And you can see there's distinct areas that have voted a particular way. So is the political fairness breaking up those areas to combine them with other areas to make it 50-50, or is there another way or interpretation of political fairness? Dr. Hanley, actually, that I will direct that question to you.
Go ahead.
I will tell you, as a political scientist, that there are dozens of ways to determine political fairness, mathematical ways to determine political fairness, from the very sophisticated, let's make a million maps approach and compare our map to these million other maps, to some very relatively straightforward ways to measure fairness. And my own favorite is something called the efficiency gap, which we could actually, I've talked to Kim briefly about the possibility of talking to Fred about building this into your software package. It doesn't require a lot of competitive districts. What it requires is, if you build really, you know, if you have a lot of wasted votes in some districts, that you have an equal number of wasted votes in another. So if you're going to recognize that there are places where these districts are going to be heavily Republican because that's all that lives there, then you also can recognize there are areas that are heavily Democratic because all the voters live there. And it tries to balance this out. And it tries to ensure that you're not wasting more votes of one party than the other, but that some districts will be heavily one way and other districts will be heavily another way. But I think that some time should be spent at some point determining how you want to go about looking at political fairness. I think that this needs to be explored. And as a political scientist, I think that you could use my assistance, or you could bring in I don't specialize in this, but you could bring in a political scientist that might help with this. But political fairness is different than competitiveness.
What about, and this is another way I was thinking about it, I probably should have mentioned it, is I've looked at some of the public comment that we've received in District R, and I can go in and take a look at the analytics of everything for the most part. And what a better way to look at political fairness, instead of looking at competitive districts, is the seat differential, because some of them are close to 49, 50 or 52, 48% split. However, the total number of seats are swayed way in one different political party's favor, at least in Lansing. Now, would a way to determine political fairness is to make that aspect as close to even as possible, rather than looking at a district. So if you have one district, that could be, let's say, 20% Democrat, 80% Republican, and then maybe a couple of those. However, by doing that, you can draw districts so that the total seat split in Lansing would be closer to 50-50. Is that a better way to determine fairness?
In a way, the efficiency gap captures that. I think that the question is broader, and Bruce, I think, will talk to you more about the broadness of the question. I'm talking about the possibility of some simple measures that could guide you and that the courts have looked at The courts haven't agreed on what a measure is, but I'm thinking things that you could look at quickly to determine what it is that you're interested in. Like I said, there's a host of partisan symmetry and partisan bias measures, and we could talk, I mean, we could use more than one, and you could, look at the things that you think are right and wrong about these various measures. All of them have their supporters and all of them have their critics, and you should probably know what these measures are good for and what they're less good for. But you probably should start thinking about that in a quick and easy way. But again, I'm going to tell you that Bruce will tell you that the question is possibly bigger than that, but there are political science means of looking at this question.
Bruce, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, a couple of things. There's also this topic, and I take, kind of piggybacking off what Lisa said and Commissioner Lang said, that all of these considerations are obviously contained in the criteria. But one of the things that we faced in Arizona, a lot of pressure to make politically competitive districts. Well, at some point that may run up against the Voting Rights Act, or that may run up against one person, one vote. And that's a subordinate criteria to the federal ones. But one of the things that two issues I'd like to talk about quickly. We have not discussed how the federal courts are viewing or have viewed in their decisions these competitiveness, political fairness, statistical models. Some have been rejected. Some have been criticized. I think we need to talk about that. Is that something? Do you want to use a measure that the courts have considered not the best? Let's say. Let's talk about that. And also one of the strategies we did in Arizona, and I'm not suggesting that this may work here. We underpopulated a lot of districts. We underpopulated majority-minority districts in order to buttress the strength of those districts against historical voting discrimination in Arizona and significant racially polarized voting. We documented that very heavily. That was part of the challenge to the legislative plan. Supreme Court and the lower federal court rejected that and said the record clearly shows that they did this to comply with the Voting Rights Act. So there's no one person, one vote violation, no constitutional issue, nothing. Compliance with the Voting Rights Act is a legitimate state government consideration in redistricting that allows some play with state legislative districting population deviations. I think I might have mentioned that a little bit in the memo I did. But that's also something I'd like to have a fuller conversation with you in person so we could go through this. As I agree with what Commissioner Lang said about it, it kind of like blows your mind in a sense, all these factors, all the things that your public hearing commenters have said, and they really eloquent, great comments, and they've been very clear. And from what I've seen, and what are their priorities? Well, but what does that mean? How does that intersect with everything else? So I agree. This is something to start thinking about. It's something to start talking about and figuring out what direction to go. But remembering that this is a subordinate criteria to the federal criteria, and that may not be, competitiveness may not always be possible. So I wanted to throw out both of those.
Commissioner Reed.
So this is something that I think about every day. How do we define the parameters for what is defined as politically fair? And there is no real, overall accepted definition of this from my understanding, unless something's happened recently that I'm unaware of. So given that, it'd probably be best to use a whole lot of different data points, whether it be efficiency gap or wasted votes, or I'll remind everyone when we submitted those Practice Ohio maps, Our friends at our university partners here in Michigan gave us pretty detailed analysis of those maps with more, analytical data points than just those two, being efficiency gap and wasted votes. And those are all useful tools that we can use, to help guide us. Now, as far as competitive fairness goes, I mean, as Bruce just eloquently stated, we might not be able to do that for every district. And I'm not sure if that's something we'd even want to do. I mean, if 80% of the people in Detroit vote Democratically, why would we want to make their district 50-50? If 80% of the people in the UP vote, for Republicans, why would we want to make their district 50-50? I think what's most important, though, and what has been echoed in the public comments, is the idea of proportionality. Whereas if, especially considering, we're in Michigan, this is a swing state, we tend to, 2016, one party won, and 2020, another party won. And that tends to happen here. So the goal in my eyes should be to make it proportional. If one party wins a certain election, that party should get the amount of seats that's proportional to the amount of votes they got, no matter which party it is. And to me, that's what's fair. Now, I think the efficiency gap data point, the main purpose of it is to address, that's specifically what it addresses as far as my understanding of it goes. But I'm sure there are plenty of other ones that do as well.
Mr. Brace.
Let me unmute myself. Sorry about that. We're always looking at data items to see what they could tell us. And I'm one of those that would like to have more data than anybody else, because they can tell different things. But certainly in terms of the competitiveness thing, I would go back to giving you an example coming out of California. California is a long and skinny kind of state. And in order to create competitive seats, because the coast is Democratic and the middle and the eastern edge of the state is Republican, for competitive seats, you'd have to create districts that are stacked going back and forth. Now, is that fair? Is that reflecting? There are a lot of conflicting ideas in terms of that. Certainly, you'd have to be crossing mountain ranges. Is that good? What you find in redistricting is there's enormous different competing interests and factions, just from a conceptual standpoint. And it will be up to you guys to ultimately decide how you want to configure it, but be cognizant that from the data side, we can really show a whole bunch of different things. And Lisa's right, she and I have been talking about what can be done and what can be shown so that we could see that in somewhat real time in some instances. And at other points in time, it may come as a result of taking a plan and then running a report off of it, kind of a thing. So there's a variety of different aspects that can be done here.
Dr. Handley.
In terms of Michigan law, actually, the point is not competitiveness. And so I don't think we have to think about that. It's no disproportionate advantage to any political party. So the issue of competitiveness is not, unless you believe lots of competitive districts equals no disproportionality to any party, which it doesn't. So I think that there are a host of political science measures that should be discussed and considered and determined whether we could use any of these in an easy way or whether you want to bring in someone who's going to do something very complicated. But it is part of the Constitution, and it isn't certainly one person, one vote in the Voting Rights Act and contiguity, and even communities of interest are above that. But other things like compactness and consideration of county boundaries are below that. So it is something you have to think about. Among all the other things that you have to think about, there's another one.
One second, Anthony. I got one quick little question here, just because I want to get onto the question about the actual continuing education here at this point. Mr. Adelson, you stated that you would like to potentially have a lengthy discussion with us. Off the top of your head, how long would this lengthy discussion potentially be? So we can try and get this added.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think that I'm flexible as far as time. I don't have any, rigid amount of time that it has to be. I'm more concerned that we have a attorney-client conversation, which is uninterrupted, where we can discuss the issues that we're briefly touching on today in more detail, as well as some issues that we have not discussed. So how much time would that be? That might be hour and a half. It might be 2 hours. It would be great if we had more of an open-ended opportunity, but I'm always very flexible about time. So I would suggest, off the top of my head, hour and a half minimum. 2 hours might be more optimal, because as you've seen just in our 25-minute or so conversation, there are a lot of issues, and there are more issues that we have not talked about. And I think that getting them out, discussed, go back and forth now, not now literally, but now before the end of the summer, I think would be very advantageous, would ease the process once you go into the fall and create a very informed situation. So off the top of my head, Commissioner, I would say that would be my off the top of my head estimate. There's one other thing that I had forgotten to mention when we were talking about continuing ed. I had suggested to Julianne that, I don't know if this has been discussed, having a mock redistricting where you have the two districts. You have a rural district and a more urban district with a larger minority population. So you can actually see what we've been talking about, that if you keep this township in this district, what does that mean? If you want to put a township in a certain district or keep a county whole, well, what are the possible implications of that? So that's a suggestion. If that's something you all are interested in, I think that could be very helpful before real time starts approximately around Labor Day. So that would be another suggestion. I apologize, I didn't recall that earlier.
That's fine. So given that piece right there, I'm just going to put this out there. I would personally look favorably on a motion to add a recommendation that we bring to the commission that we give Bruce 2 hours of time to be scheduled at a later date once we have a full discussion with the commission, so that he can do some continuing education with us. Doug had his hand up first, and then to you, Rhonda.
Yeah, question for Bruce. When you say hour and a half or 2 hour meeting, attorney-client privilege, does this mean it is not open to the public?
Well, I didn't say attorney-client privilege, Commissioner. I said attorney-client conversation. The privilege, I understand, is a different issue, and I understand what the Michigan law says about closed meetings and attorney-client communication, but I'm not talking about necessarily a privileged confidential meeting. It's just our time together has been somewhat limited. And today, because I know you have a full agenda, and we have Kim and Lisa and I are here answering questions and providing information. As your attorney, I am recommending that we have a defined period where I can speak with you. Doesn't have to be confidential about the issues that we're talking about in more detail, and also the issues that we haven't talked about. So, and doing that before the end of the summer, before crunch time starts, I think would be helpful. But I'm not talking about an attorney-client privileged closed session conversation.
I'll put that motion forward, Dustin. One you suggested.
Is there a second?
Yeah, I'll second that.
And motion's been moved and seconded to have a recommendation to the full commission to have Bruce have we'll put 2 hours on the actual schedule to have him have a discussion with us. And then
Excuse me. I'm sorry, but I never got to ask my question.
well, motion was seconded. So your question will come when we do the discussion of the motion. So I was just restating the motion. So with that, is there any discussion on the motion? Commissioner Lang? Okay. On the motion to put this recommendation forward, you are in favor of it, raise your right hand and say yay.
Yeah.
Yes. All opposed, raise your hand and say nay.
Hey.
3-1 motion carries for the recommendation that we add or that we recommend to the full commission that we allow for a 2-hour addition to business for Bruce to have a discussion with the full commission. Commissioner Lang.
I just want to know, what does that have to do with coming up with the process for drawing maps? I'm confused. Yes, we need to have continued ed, but I thought this meeting was about doing the process for drawing maps. I'm getting so off track, you guys, and I'm sorry, but I'm just trying to keep it about what this is supposed to be about. It's not supposed to be about continued ed. It's supposed to be about the process and coming up with the process. So that's all I got to say, just voicing my opinion.
Well, wouldn't that was a direct question that we had regarding the VRA legal counsel and the questions to the commission for today. So with a response of that, with an answer of that kind of response, wouldn't it be appropriate to at least grant Bruce the time at this particular point to say, hey, this was requested during it. This was a direct question that we had regarding VRA during the process meeting. This was a suggestion that he had. What's the harm in asking for or just doing that as well? I mean, it is technically part of the process because we need to know what information we're going to be looking for. Anything else in regards to continuing education? Commissioner Reed.
Thank you. What would be useful to me, and maybe this can be put together, with all of our team members in conjunction, excuse me. But I'm looking at some of my previous notes again on these metrics that we're discussing, which I think are a part of this whole process. And I'm seeing a whole bunch of different measurements. I'm seeing mean median, partisan bias, partisan Gini, efficiency gap, the Plosby-Popper compactness score, wasted votes metrics, and there's a lot of them. And I don't think all of the commissioners have a proper understanding of not only what each of these are, but also, as we said earlier, which ones are most accepted by the courts. So what would help me is some sort of memo or something that kind of goes over all of these and says which ones are the best practices to use as far as what the courts have been saying.
That makes sense. Anything else in regards to continuing education, or are we ready to move on to question 3, which is the timeline? If we are, Commissioner Clark?
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree with what Anthony just said. There's a lot of terms being used that we don't understand the significance of them and how we would apply them, and I think that would be very helpful.
And that would, I would imagine, be part of Bruce's presentation that he would give us. Which is what
Well, I think some of the terms come from Lisa as well.
True.
Yeah. And Kim as well. Some of the things that they do on their side.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
So
if
I would suggest that maybe we use our staff to work with the vendors to put something like that together.
certainly from our standpoint, I agree with all of you that a collective memo that outlines from each of our perspectives the various issues that you have before you would be probably the most useful for you to move forward with.
Anything else in regards to continuing ed?
So just for clarity, can all of y'all work together to put something together for us like that? I'm sure our general counsel and executive director can, help organize it and get everything together to create that kind of memo.
Well, that was the quickest tie I've seen in my entire life with hand raising. So let's go with Director Hammersmith first.
I just want to let you know that your staff are here to serve you. And if that's the need of the commission, we will certainly make sure that this happens on your behalf. So we'll take care of it.
Yeah, can't hurt. General Counsel?
Nothing to add, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
All right. Anthony, would you like to go ahead and ask question 3, please?
All righty. Well, that was good. Next question is more about the timeline, and we've kind of gone over some of it already, but how does the timeline for the work that each of you coordinate with the mapping process and racial polarized voting analysis? What's the timeline on that? I know we've said that some of it will occur in real time, some of it will occur in the form of a report after the fact, but is there a timeline that we should be cognizant of?
I was going to say, let me add on to that, if you don't mind. And with the timeline itself, what would be the best way for us to get information between both election data services and yourself, Bruce?
Well, I think to echo what Lisa and Kim said, we're all eager to have election results. Election results are the bread and butter in many ways of redistricting. And one of the things that occurred to me the other day was you had a very contested 2020 U.S. Senate election that I think you had an African-American candidate who ran statewide. Those are great elections potentially to look at and analyze to get an idea of racial bloc voting. So having a statewide minority candidate run is like, to me, that's like fantastic. I get very excited about that because that's an undisputable election as far as being able to provide clarity, information, and enable Voting Rights Act compliance. So getting those election returns in the formats that work for Lisa and Kim, really important. I know that that's something that I'm doing in other states. We're getting election returns. We have returns. We're doing the analysis. So being able to do that, and Lisa mentioned that very important term, bellwether elections, looking at elections that are Voting Rights Act relevant, particularly elections where there was a minority candidate, and analyzing them. So that's something that is really important. I too am eager, like everyone, to see the census data. The census data will inform many other things too, so that while I will provide real-time analysis, opinions as you're districting, as you're tweaking, making changes, coming up with your originals, then there will be an additional level of analysis that we've talked about as well. But once you have the election returns, once the election returns are downloaded in the formats that Lisa and Kim need, then we can begin to see, as the analysis moves forward, what the universe is that we're talking about. The extent of racially polarized voting. Where is it, in what elections has it been more prevalent? Where are there issues that we need to be particularly aware of? I use the East Point case just as an example, because that tells me that there has been analysis in Macomb County, in the city of East Point, regarding racial bloc voting. Very helpful. And as we get the other election returns, they will be even more helpful.
So I keep hearing that, you know, we're waiting for the census results and all that. I'm assuming that the legacy data is not going to give you the information that you need.
Well, I'm going to defer to Kim and Lisa. I know people have different opinions about the legacy data. I know that in one of the states that I work in, my expert wants to confirm the legacy data with the PL data when it comes out at the end of September, but it's not like that's an absolute, way to go. But the legacy data, as you know, has to be put in a usable format. That's going to be the first 2021 data that we have the potential of seeing. So once that data is ready for all of us to view, see, analyze, think about, peruse, then, the process starts to pick up steam, because then we have the actual working numbers that we can use.
Dr. Handel?
And that you can use.
The racial bloc voting analysis also requires not just election results, but it requires the PL data. I think the legacy data Kim is able to deal with, so I don't think we have to wait until the end of September, but we have to wait until August, because as I said, I need two pieces of information: the election results and the demographic data. And with the exception of the contests that we're going to view before 2015. So some of this will necessarily happen later rather than sooner.
Mr. Bruce? Anything? So the census is still the biggest quarrel in our timeline here.
Oh, yes, I know.
Okay, anyone else have any questions in regards to the timeline at this particular point? Commissioner Reed.
So in an ideal world, we're going to get the census data September 30th, knock on wood, of course, see what they do over at the Bureau. But after we get that and it picks up steam, how long does this analysis take? I think that's what we're talking about. We need an understanding of, we're going to be crunched for time. No matter what timeline we come up with, it's going to be hard. There are going to be a lot of meetings. They're going to have to be in person now. So I think what we need is an understanding of how long, these different analyses take.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, please give you at least some guidance and thought process from our side. What we see coming, and I think the best way to organize on the data side is we will make use of the legacy data and crunch that first. Obviously, that information, I envision some multi-part viewing of information and analysis of information, many of which follows the patterns that I've been showing you. the maps that we saw. When we get the PL data, we will make new maps showing what the PL data is telling us. We can then compare it with the ACS, for example, if need be, but we can see finalized numbers coming from PL. That would be both in terms of mapping as well as tables. We plan to produce population counts of the existing districts and what's the deviations from the existing districts first off. That's a guidepost of how far out of whack are the existing districts, certainly. Of course, we're gonna, start from scratch, I agree, but at the very least, knowing where things stand on the existing districts is important. Knowing what the county by county data shows. Are there some anomalies in that county by county data or township by township data that we need to be cognizant of? All of that kind of analysis will take place as soon as we can start crunching that legacy data information, so that we'll start feeding you data and tables and maps of all of this kind of stuff. It won't be, finalized and that sort of thing, but it'll give you some beginning points of seeing and having information to help you. Ultimately, that's going to get combined into the master database that goes into the mapping software. Right now, we're trying to add in all the election side of things. That's behind time right now because we've been waiting for the state to provide that information, but we're seeing some progress over the weekend. Just trying to understand what we've got, and massive downloads, FTP sites, and that sort of stuff. So that's the component that ultimately we need for both Lisa's analysis side, the election side, as well as the competitiveness side of things. What do the districts ultimately look like? And then if you remember what I was showing you on Friday is what that spreadsheet on the bottom of the computer screen would look like. We'll be formatting that to include additional tabs now for the PL information. And as I mentioned, additional tabs to the far right with the election data, so that as we're drawing, all of that information will change real time to help you then decide what you need. So that ultimately snapshots of that can go to Bruce and to Lisa, like what we're doing in a couple other clients right now, Lisa and I, so that that information can go into her analysis as well as Bruce's analysis. But it's that components of all of those data that would come together and be able to start feeding both the experts as well as the commission. I'd be happy to answer questions.
Any questions for Bruce around timeline? All right. We can move on to question 4, but I have a feeling question 4 has already been answered because it has to do with documentation. So if anyone else has any questions about documentation or adherence to the VRA, please go ahead.
If I could just add something quickly related to 4, talking about documentation. One of the things that I don't recall who said this in conversation about communities of interest last week is that they are not covered or they're not under the Voting Rights Act. That's incorrect. The entire state of Michigan is covered by the Voting Rights Act. The extent that the Voting Rights Act applies, of course, will differ around the state. But since communities of interest are such a significant priority, as your hearing participants have noted, and as you all have noted in the meetings that I've watched, I'd like some information, which I'm sure we'll get later from Kim, about particular communities of interest and their effect on minority populations. So if, for example, you include a overwhelmingly white community with minority communities, does that dilute voting strength? Does that is that discriminatory? So that's something that, with documentation, I'd like more in-depth analysis, demographic info about the announced communities of interest, and certainly the communities that you all are prioritizing, to see how that impacts the Voting Rights Act and also how that may impact the one person, one vote requirements.
Commissioner Clark.
Yeah, I've got one last comment on documentation. I think we've got a good sense on how Lisa documents her work and Bruce documents his and how EDS documents theirs. But I don't have a good sense on how we're going to document our stuff, what template we're going to use, and who is going to do the documentation as we go through this. I think we need to define that as part of the process. And my recommendation is that we do have a template. My recommendation is that we utilize the staff or the state of Michigan to do the documentation so that 13 commissioners can concentrate on the work that's being done to redistrict. I'd like to get some comments from some of the commissioners on that.
Are you saying like, well,
let's say we make some decisions.
yeah,
We want to move this township from point A to point B, from this district to this district. What's our rationale for doing that? Why are we doing that? We need to document that at some point in time, because Bruce isn't documenting it, and I don't believe Lisa's documenting it. They're documenting their analysis of that move. But we've made a decision to make that move based on certain criteria, and we need to have that documented.
So I guess my question, my kind of question to that, Doug, would be, if we're working in the software and everything's timestamped and everything's being recorded, wouldn't our rationale be recorded because we're talking about the particular thing in the public record? Okay,
your rationale is I'm just going to make this up. We don't have enough Bangladesh people in this area, and we want to move this township over to that other district to make that happen. Now, where's that documented?
Right.
Bruce didn't document that. Lisa didn't document that. EDS didn't necessarily document. They may have documented that we moved that township from point A to point B, but not the reason why we did that.
Wouldn't the reasoning be able to be cross-referenced to the timestamp to what we did in the mapping software to the actual recording of our meeting that is going to be publicly available, so we can go in and take a look and listen to the rationale that we've been making?
You mean,
would you want it written down?
Yeah, written down. If you don't write it down, then let's say you get in a court case, what are we going to do? Show YouTube videos for 3 weeks till we find that point in time?
Maybe.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just using this as a hypothetical example. Yeah, but that's my point on this. That we need to have a mechanism on our side as well. So we got a four-legged stool. We got us, EDS, Bruce, and Lisa documenting things.
General Counsel, thoughts?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And yes, people can always avail themselves of the videos, which are found at www.michigan.gov/MICRC, but also the Secretary of State's site. But I believe that was one of the suggestions Mr. Morgan made, if I recall, and I know Kim will correct me if I misstate, but having that working resolution in draft form that memorialize those changes for action or whatever the commission ultimately decides to act on as far as those changes, but that the actual moving of the lines would be fluid and dynamic and not perforated or punctuated with multiple votes. It was more capturing the intent and the reasoning so that the commission could then make their decisions, is my recollection. Thank you.
I mean, I'll say something to that. I want to say that you're correct, Julianne. It did mention that, I believe Mr. Morgan mentioned that it's not the importance of documenting every tiny little change that you're making into the software is not necessarily needed until you actually decide on the final change as to why you made this change and then document that. Is that correct?
Correct. And my understanding was that that would all be tracked. And as I recall, it was Mr. Morgan as well that I noted had made that recommendation. So I think there are tools during the process that can be used, again, by staff and consultants and individuals supporting the commission's work that would capture the data, the data and the rationale necessary during your process.
Mr. Brace?
Yes, I think Julianne's correct from that side. John did mention that. I think what you're really looking at is documenting major efforts, major decision makings. It may be Doug saying that we need to move this township over into this area, and that kind of moved the direction of the plan ultimately in that shape on that side. So documenting that sort of thing. And it, ultimately I'm thinking like I'm not a lawyer, but I'm an expert witness, and, getting transcripts, which you do have, and doing keyword indexes of those so that, anytime we see the word decision or whatever keyword we want to say at that point in time, that kind of gets documented then, at least in terms of the transcript, so that we don't have to tell the court to watch three weeks worth of YouTubes on that side.
And if I could add a little bit to that, I agree. I think the most relevant changes to document are when you are at your draft stage, you go out, public comment. If you make changes before your final map is created and approved, clearly those changes are going to be quite significant. But I would add too, Kim had mentioned major changes. I think, as you know, this is a very fluid process. There are going to be all kinds of things that are going on that in real time that may change the flow, change the way, you're thinking about approaching things. One of the issues can be too, if there are major changes that I think are major changes, I will tell you that I think this is a major change, and I would recommend that you document them. Now, one of the things they did in Arizona, they called those changes change orders, so they would stand out in the record. So if they made changes from draft to final, particularly with VRA or constitutional implications, they called them change orders, they stood out, and you know what, in our litigations, the courts looked at those orders, because in the briefing, the attorneys all steered the court to look there, because there were good summaries of why the commission did what it did, what their rationales were, if there was an underpopulation or some consideration based on race to comply with the Voting Rights Act, was all there. But I think that, again, in looking at there being some fluidity here, if there are changes that are major, certainly Julianne and I will talk about them, we'll highlight them, and then you could create whatever you feel is appropriate to document why you did what you did. Because you also have to keep in mind, if there are lawsuits alleging intentional discrimination, lawsuits alleging a pattern or practice of behavior, the plaintiff will want to look at more, of course, than what you did in the few weeks between draft and final. And that's why I'm suggesting there may be other changes than those that are made at the end that I would recommend documenting.
So, and that's document on our side.
Right.
Yeah.
Because as you said, Commissioner Clark, you're the ones making the changes. So my saying the commission did X, Y, and Z is not only not dispositive, that's something that no court is going to put a lot of value on.
Yeah, correct. And that's why I brought up the subject that we need our own template on how we're going to do this and who's going to do it on our side. And I fully support the major change, not every change. I think, and as long as you're going to cue us on what a major change is, I'm fine with that.
Sure.
Yeah, because you're going to be in all these meetings anyways. I'm good with that. I mean, I relate this back to my software development days. We had a system, and anytime we made a change, there was a change request and approved and documented on why we made it and what we did, and we had a mechanism to back off as part of that too, which we have with the EDS software. We can back off and so forth. So that's already built in. But okay, so I want to go back to my original question, Dustin. I feel we need a template, and I feel, and that needs to be developed, and for documentation, and we need to determine what the repository is and who's going to actually do that documentation. And I don't think it should be one of the commissioners doing the documentation.
No, it would either be a consultant or the Secretary of State, I would imagine, or the Department of State.
Or our staff. Our staff.
staff.
Yeah, I think that would be relevant too.
But
they got to get it enough detail on what that change was. That's all.
I did want to clarify something, because you said making major changes from after draft to final maps. We're not going to have to be documenting everything change and rationale that we're changing while we're producing our draft maps, are we?
No, I think as Commissioner Clark was suggesting, there may be, like if you decide to reduce a majority minority district from majority minority to 20% minority, and there's a discussion about that early on, for example, then I would suggest that there be some documentation of that. But to your point, there are a lot of districts in Michigan where the Voting Rights Act really won't come into play. So the documentation is more along the lines of later in the process. And I think that your emphasis on later in the process is very well put and important, because you're right. You're not going to want to create a substantial memo for every change. I mean, we're talking dozens, if not hundreds, of potential changes.
Director Hammersmith?
Yes, I just wanted to confirm that between your staff and between MDOT staff, we certainly will keep track of any major decisions for the record. The minutes would reflect those. We can also create a series of resolutions or whatever the commission feels they need in order to document the major changes that will happen.
Anything further?
I would suggest that the changes be kept separate from the minutes. The minutes may reference them, but that they be on separate piece of paper, cataloged somehow, and in a specific, not discrete, but a specific dedicated repository.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Anything else in regards to question for documentation or no?
Can we put that forward as a motion on that this is how we're going to handle it? This is the recommendation we're going back to the commission with?
If you want to make a motion, go ahead.
I do. Yeah, I'll make that motion that the commission will document major changes, and that documentation will be done by the staff during the meetings, separate from the meeting minutes, and put in a separate repository for future use.
There a second? I don't know if I'm allowed to second anything. Julianne, am I allowed to, as chair, second something?
Yes, Mr. Chair, you're a full member of the committee.
Got it. I'll second that motion. Okay, so motion on the floor has been seconded to commission document major changes, and those changes are documented by staff and the Secretary of State. And they are going to be separate from the meeting minutes and stored in a separate repository. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none.
Rhonda has her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Rhonda, my bad.
I just want to say, does that really warrant a motion? I mean, there's a lot of more motions for recommendations, but does it really warrant a motion? I mean, it seems pretty basic.
The reason I put it as a motion to ensure that it got on the list of things that we're gonna recommend back to the commission. We don't need to if you don't want to.
No,
As long as it's on, as long as it's on the list.
I'm just asking the question.
I was just following Robert's rules. That's all.
We're trying our best.
We're trying our best, yeah.
Any further discussion on the motion?
I would just say, we might, as a commission, want to approve that document in like the same manner that we approve the minutes or something like that. What are your thoughts on that?
I think what we're doing is approving the change to the district, and I'm gonna rephrase everything. Yeah, I think we should, because we gotta make sure the verbiage is correct, Anthony. I think that's a good point.
Well, again, this is just for a recommendation anyway of something to bring back. We're gonna all have to discuss
Correct.
these things anyway, and how we want to do it. It's just a way to facilitate, like, this is what we've discussed and think they're important, so that when we actually, with all 13 of us, we're not dragging on for hours and hours and hours.
Correct. All right.
Any further discussion on the motion? Okay, seeing none. We'll vote on the motion. Again, the motion is that the commission retains documentation of major changes, and those changes are recorded by staff as well as the Department of State. And those records will be separate from the meeting minutes and stored in separate repositories. All in favor of the recommendation, please raise your right hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign, say nay. Motion carries unanimously. Any other questions in regard to question 4 in regards to documentation, General Counsel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just very briefly, just to clarify for the benefit of the public, the record that the official record of the commission held by the Secretary of State's office is non-voting secretary to the commission. That is the only repository. So the separate repository would just be a heading or a separate section. I just wanted to make sure that everyone was aware that there is only one official record for the commission. So everything that the commission does will be part of that one repository that can be subdivided, but there won't be anywhere separate that the public would need to go. Thank you.
I guess what I took that as, it's on a separate piece of paper so that the minutes on these changes aren't on the same piece of paper that gets filed.
Correct, and putting them in a separate directory on the website or wherever that repository is, that's fine. As long as it's segregated from the rest of the stuff in some manner.
All right.
Correct. I just wanted to make sure the public didn't think there was going to be some separate repository being held. It's all on the commission's website and will continue to be. So, okay, thank you.
Anything else in regards to question 4 for the VRA legal counsel? All righty. Well, seeing none, since we've been at it for about 2 hours now, I feel like we should be able to take a good 10-minute breather here at this particular point. If anyone wants to make that motion.
Yeah, I make that motion, Dustin. We take a 10-minute break.
All I'd also second that motion. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor to take a quick 10-minute break, please raise your right hand and say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Okay, we'll stand in recess. Actually, we are adjourned at recess, sorry, at 10:56, and we'll stand in recess until 11:06 p.m. Already as chair of the process committee for the MICRC, I called this meeting back to order at 11:06 a.m. I do want to correct the record before we went on break. I said we'll be in recess until 11:06 p.m. and I plan on sleeping at that time. So I meant to say 11:06 a.m. At this time, will the Michigan Department of State Staff please call the roll?
Hello, Commissioners. Happy to. I will start with, well, actually, sorry. Commissioners, please say present when I call your name. And please disclose the area that you are attending the meeting remotely from by stating the county, city, township, or village and the state from which you are attending the meeting. I'll start with Doug Clark.
Present, and I'm attending the meeting remotely from Rochester Hills, Michigan.
Anthony Eade. Rhonda Lang.
Present. I'm remotely attending from Detroit, Michigan.
Thank you. Rhonda Lang.
President, attending remotely from Reed City, Michigan.
Dustin Witches.
Present, and I'm attending remotely from Howell, Michigan.
All commissioners are present.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, so let me pull the agenda up here real quick so I can get a feel for where we're at. So we're still on new business A, which is for questions and fact finding, and we went through the VRA questions at this particular point in time. There are some other questions in our list. If anyone has any one of those that they'd like to ask, feel free to do so. Mr. Brace.
Yes, I wanted to point out up above the VRA in the regarding mapping, question number 6, is it possible to include an overlay of historically redlined municipalities when we draw the maps? And my question would be is, what's the source of that data? We can we can overlay just like communities of interest, but do we have a good source of where redlining occurred?
As opposed to people's opinions, I would imagine.
Right, right.
I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know.
I don't know the answer to that either. That's why I'm raising the question.
I don't know if Bruce is back yet. He may have an idea, or Dr. Handley may have an idea.
Now you can hear me. A lot of states have really good data that might be responsive to this state-produced data. Offhand, I don't know what data Michigan has, but I agree with Kim's about the question is the relevance of the data, and not the relevance of source of the data, because the data itself could be very important, having a understanding of the history of discrimination in Michigan. My suggestion is state-produced data if it exists.
Does that somewhat answer your question? It'd be the best answer I could give you.
I guess my question would be, is it something that staff could investigate by inquiring other people in the state?
Director Hammersmith, General Counsel, any thoughts? For Sarah, any thoughts? Director Hammersmith?
This was a question raised by MC, so I will get back with him and talk to him to see if he knows of any data source, but certainly if there isn't any collected by the state of Michigan, I think it would be hard to include it, but he did want that question included.
Okay. So here's my question that I was going to ask, and it just regards the process. I don't know if we touched on it on Friday or not, but kind of now that we have everybody here, and that is just the general time requirement. Near both or all three of your professional opinions, how long do you think it's going to take us to draw the 161 total districts? Keeping in mind that we're going to have to be sending data and information back and forth between everybody in regards to this. If you had to take a guess, how many hours would this take? Or days, or if that's easier.
Unfortunately, in all likelihood, it will take more time than you anticipate, and you'll have less time to do it in. Unfortunately, a common rule in redistricting on that side.
And I would add to that you know, in my experience in redistricting, we've had a lot of weekend meetings, like all day meetings into the evening. Not every day, certainly, but we had several of them, certainly in Arizona, and we didn't have 161 districts. You will have among your districts, as I said earlier, a lot of your districts are going to have not much Voting Rights Act issues to deal with. Now, of course, every district fits with another into the great jigsaw puzzle of the state. So making changes in one may well impact changes in another. But for me, the Voting Rights Act area districts are relatively concentrated in various parts of the state. So it should be relatively easy to draw certain districts, whether they're in the UP or rural district in northwestern Michigan, where Voting Rights Act issues really don't come into play as much as in Wayne County, for example. And I know that's something that in my redistricting experience, we've always tried to do first the districts that we imagined would be the easiest to do as far as the amount of work expended, the amount of analysis. And you do have parts of the state where, to me, I think that could well be true.
All right, so now follow-up question based on, again, expertise of everyone here. Do you know of any ways that we could possibly increase efficiency?
Well, you know, I think that, I mean, that's always one of the key questions, but I think that, frankly, is a function of how you all work together, what your, the way you do business. And as you proceed, there are going to be areas of disagreement. There are going to be areas that I'm sure, I don't mean geographic areas, I just mean issues that some people feel more strongly about than others. How you deal with them is really a function of, you know, administration almost. I'm very confident that, you know, as we had talked about before, from my perspective, you know, you have with Kim and Lisa there, you know, they really know their stuff. And, you know, I've been familiar with the work that Lisa's done since I started doing this 21 years ago. So I'm very confident in being able to move quickly, but I don't know that there is a specific way that you could speed up the work generally. And I'm certainly not going to presume to say, you know, what specific efficiencies to look at. But I think that that's also part of the reasons that I wanted to come out and talk to you, that just having a sense of what priorities you all have, how willing are people to, you know, have those until 10 o'clock meetings on Saturday night. That could be part of the process.
I guess I would probably make a couple of recommendations or suggestions. You first of all need to become comfortable with the software and the map drawer, and work out how that could operate, how you become comfortable. That's probably done by either kind of a preliminary test plan for a given area, region, or something like that. Those kind of concepts could be played with. What we envision is the way that we've set up the team is that we really have three people that could be map drawers. John, Kent, and myself as the main map drawers from that side. So the question would be from your guys' side, I mean, in theory, we could end up running 3 sessions at any point in time. 3 different regions or, groupings or whatever. I don't know that I necessarily want to do that on an ongoing nonstop until 10 o'clock at night kind of basis, but be cognizant of wearing out all staff also on that side. But, that kind of an overview kind of thing might help you a little bit in terms of how you'd want to ultimately structure. I do get back to that regional kind of thing. And it may be that you end up getting everybody involved in this test drawing so that everybody becomes comfortable once they've, been trained by Fred on the 8th, if that's what we're going to do. Then we have a meeting of everybody to, draw a test area and see how you guys could work together, that sort of thing, without getting specifics in terms of one particular, we got to be concerned about Kim Brace's area or whatever the case may be, but just get some overview concepts for everybody to feel comfortable with all commission members. Just an idea.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to just say quickly, and that's also picking up on what Kim said. I think that's one of the reasons that I suggested mock redistricting, and I'm sure that that's similar to what Kim is talking about. I think that could be really helpful in familiarizing everyone with the software, the technology, but also, I think as Commissioner Clark said earlier, well, what happens if we do move this township over here? What are the consequences of that? I think that has a great potential and, frankly, probability to move the process along, because everybody will just be more familiar with your tools if you have a test, do a mock before Labor Day.
Any other questions from any of the commissioners from our list, or anything you've thought of to either Mr. Brace, Dr. Hadley, or Bruce Adelson? Commissioner Clark.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to one of the decisions that we made for a recommendation back to the commission, and that's relative to the JERGs. And the recommendation that we have on record is that the commission determine the regions and take a regional approach starting with the state Senate maps. I'm okay with the second half, but the first part, I think what we should do is present back to them the JERGs that EDS presented to us in one of their presentations, and ask the commission if that's acceptable or if they want to modify it, instead of starting off with a blank piece of paper.
Could hold off on that question until we get to 5B for our committee discussion.
Okay, fine.
Because that's right in the first section of that.
Okay, fine.
So at this particular point, I'm just wondering if there's any additional questions from the particular list, or if anything popped into your head that isn't on there at this particular point. Mr. Brace.
I guess following up on what Commissioner Clark said, maybe the first exercise that we have everybody involved with is to create your own JERGs or your own regions, and let's have that as an exercise for everybody and how you'd think in terms of the state in how you do regions. And that, we can draw them, we can do different things with them on the screen, show what's populations, what the racial groups are, that sort of thing, so that becomes a partway meaningful exercise of showing what can be done, but getting to an ultimate goal of, hey, these are areas that ultimately we'd want to potentially draw in because we're thinking in terms of region. So let's get everybody involved with how do you think, where do you think the thumb region is? How far down does it go? How far west does it go? And let give and take happen from that side.
So you're saying use that as a collaborative exercise to get the people working together?
Sure. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
hold on. Let me
Okay.
get back to the part A of the business agenda here real quick. So if there aren't any questions, just to follow Robert's rules without objection, we can move to 5B, our committee discussion. Okay, seeing none, now we're in our committee discussion part of the agenda where we go over the review process and continued development and recommendations. And one-time committee discussions on mapping. And this is where we're at this particular point with discussion of how we're going to handle JERGs if we're drawing our own region, so on and so forth. So just so that the record remains clear that we stay somewhat on track and not bouncing all over the place. General Counsel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just for clarification, I'm trying to understand, Commissioner Clark is wanting to send a different recommendation to the commission, or that the goal is that when the commission takes up the current recommendation that was made, that this fuller conversation and the options will be explored?
And can I respond to that, Dustin?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Originally, when I mentioned it, it was going to be additional recommendation or a change in the recommendation. But based on what Kim said, that may be a better approach, which would mean that the commission determines the regions. It's just what process we go through to do that, in which he recommends like a training exercise to get us to work together and to discuss the state as a whole. So I'm fine with that too. I just think we should clarify it in the recommendation that's how we would recommend approaching it.
Well, they're all just recommendations, right? So this is all going to be
Correct.
brought up anyway and then discussed. So it's not anything that's set in stone. So
Correct. Yeah. So I think what Kim mentioned is probably a better approach. Yeah.
Okay.
I agree. I like framing it as more of a team building exercise that can, we can spend a little time doing that and it might pay off in dividends down the line.
Plus, at that particular point, we'll be able to start to realize, we'll be able to figure out how well we work together in regards to actually drawing the lines. I mean, I assume we're going to be just fine, but how we'll handle differences when we're actually doing the
And
actual
it gets us used to the software a little bit too.
Correct.
Maybe we could just rephrase the recommendation that's how we're going to approach it with the commission.
General Counsel Pastula, does that require a motion or do we just need to rephrase it?
Well, if you're going to change the recommendation, yes, you would have to formally change the recommendation. But again, I think that it sounds, what I'm hearing is that the committee would like to have that fuller discussion with the commission. So the recommendation as is might be appropriate to go forward.
That's my understanding.
Yeah. I think it's just a matter of how we do it. Once we get to the commission.
And that can be coordinated or incorporated into the decisions, the decisions on mapping chart, even if just at the end where the executive director is noting other considerations. That would be my recommendation. Thank you.
Okay.
Most of these, I'm just noticing, most of these committee discussion things under 5B on the agenda, we talked about on Friday with us, or with all of us here. Am I correct in that? Does anyone see anything in that particular list that we have not covered that you would like to cover? Because I'm going over this and I'm seeing like the communities of interest thing. That was a recommendation that we talked with everyone about how we're going to rank them.
Yeah.
The where to start from scratch, JERGs, the criteria, so on and so forth. That is part of what you just said, as well as the community of interest discussion. Documentation was handled. Regional approach is, I think, a suggestion that we already, a recommendation that we already put forward. And the mapping process to be as most efficient and effective, I suppose we didn't touch on, but that also goes into part 3, and I'm assuming your flow chart as well, Doug.
Correct. Can I back up to one item? You talked about communities of interest.
1 second, let me get Commissioner Lang first.
Okay, yep, please do.
Good? Okay, Commissioner Clark.
Could you refresh my memory on, or all our memories on what we decided with communities of interest?
Well, so with the communities of interest, the way I remember it is we were gonna try talking about how we were gonna rank or how we were gonna discuss communities of interest. Rhonda, I believe, brought this up. And what it came down to was, I think I said, is like, since this is so high on our list of criteria, I feel like it would be more appropriate to have the full commission be present when we discuss how we're going to rank and decide communities of interest, and how we're going to like go over our notes to see, you know, what ranks higher than others, and how are we doing this and that and the other thing when it comes to communities of interest ranking.
So yeah, I would almost, I want to go back to that discussion. I would almost think that because there's so many comments and so much data relative to communities of interest in the state, that once we set up these JERGs, we set up a regional specialist, one of the commissioners that can deep dive into the communities of interest for that region and understand it. So let's say there's 9 regions. You just cut my work from 9 regions down to 1. So I got 1/9 amount of work to really fully understand something.
Commissioner Lang, and then I'll give my thoughts after that.
Okay.
I was just going to stress a point. You were right about saying that we were going to take it to the full commission because it is a
Because it's so important.
topic that needs to be discussed by the full commission. But I also want to, I guess, parrot what Julianne said. It's not that we're ranking them. And I know I used that term last week too, in inappropriate term. It's just to how do we place them and take into consideration everybody's. So I'm trying to use the proper, not ranking. So just want to throw that out there that I do listen to you, Julianne.
That's what I meant. So the other thing is that again, this would have to go back to the entire commission discussion of how we are going to work with communities of interest, not necessarily rank them. See, I'm paying attention. But I don't think, and again, we can talk this over when we have this discussion with everyone. But one commissioner being in charge of one particular region and working with communities of interest, I feel that is going to cause some kind of headache, because one person's analysis of what they think the community of interest would be, or communities of interest in one particular region would be, could be vastly different than what, let's say, you would think, or I would think, or Commissioner Lang would think, Commissioner you would think. We all have our own different opinions. So if one person were to go in and do a deep dive and say, this is how I think it would be, it's going to cause more scrutiny, and everyone's going to have to look at it, and then we're going to be back at square one. But if we all were to take one particular region at a time and work together on it and all come to a consensus of the communities of interest, then that may be a better approach. I don't know. This is something, again, that we have to, in my opinion, we all have to discuss with everybody present. Commissioner Clark.
Yeah, I just asked to refresh my memory on what we decided and why we decided that. When I looked at a regional expert, I looked at it from the point of view that they would recommend things. They wouldn't be the sole person says, this is it for this region, you know? And then other people could chime in during the discussion. But anyways, there's different approaches we can take. And yeah, our decision was to go back to the commission and decide how to approach that. So, okay, thank you.
Commissioner Eden.
I'd like to hear from some of our experts here on, experiences they have had on the topic of making sure that all of the different communities of interest are heard in some way, especially when you might have competing interests with some of them. So,
Mr. Brace.
Wisdom on that topic.
Yep, sorry, I had to unmute myself. I was thinking along the same lines, and I guess let me give you some ideas on that side. We have been talking with Moon in terms of getting feed or files from her. And there's really two components of those. One is a shapefile that shows the different communities of interest that have been drawn. Let's say that we get them by region from her, so that they would be on the screen as different, probably different colored overlays and outlines in terms of those. They would be identified and tied back to a file number that is in her database. So that gives us, from a mapping standpoint, an overlay of a bunch of stuff. So while that is visible on the screen, what really probably would need to be done or thought about is, and getting back to this idea of the specialist for that region, you could then, as that specialist for that region, you could spend the additional time to read through all those comments, read through those pieces that have been identified by the number that we have, from that shapefile that we're getting from Moon, so that you have a way of going back and getting a little bit more in-depth, a little bit more discovery of what people were saying, so that you could end up starting the discussion in your region as the specialist in the region, not necessarily saying this is the best one or whatever, but at least you've got to, you've spent the time to look in depth at these, is what my thought would be.
And I would add that from a legal perspective, it's kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, that the communities of interest may have, depending on the district, the area, the composition, may have a discriminatory impact. They may have a dilutive impact. That depends on where they are and the constituencies of each area. But, there are several comments that I heard. Like, for example, I know that several people had mentioned an entire county is a community of interest. I disagree with that. I don't think an entire county can be a community of interest, particularly depending on the population of the county, the size of the county, and where it is. So I think that there are these additional factors, however you decide to approach this, that must be evaluated and included. That could be part of the legal conversation we have, but I think that everyone, kind of being on the same page about what is a community of interest, as well as also there are specific legal ramifications of defining something as a community of interest. And I would add too, since that's paragraph C in the Constitution, that the sentence is diverse population and communities of interest. So how does that work together? How do you interpret both? How are they both applied? So my ongoing concerns tend to be legal, and this is one of them.
Clark?
Yeah, I mean, you answered my question. We're going to bring it to the commission. We'll discuss the various options, and then we'll move forward with it. And hopefully we'll have Bruce on the line at that time and Kim to make some comments relative to what we talk about. So, okay, thank you.
Commissioner Lang,
I have a different topic,
go ahead.
and I've thought about this all weekend long. I read the Constitution over and over again. There's nothing in the Constitution that says we need to have one map. And I stressed this last week about fairness, and maybe we need to define what our opinion of fairness is. I'm looking at comments that have been given, all different comments from all spectrums. Some say start with fresh maps, some say keep the maps the way they are. So if I were to make a motion, I would move that the commission come up with 2 maps. One that starts from fresh and one that alters the current maps to get rid of the gerrymandering and take into consideration community of interest, and then submit both maps to the public for their opinions. Because upon seeing those, opinions of either side could change. And I think it would be more fair of us if we did it that route. And that's just my opinion. I wanted to get that out there because I thought on it all weekend, because I'm trying to be as fair as possible. And I see a hand.
I was gonna, Doug, before I call on you, I was gonna say,
Sure.
you're saying one map each for the Senate, House, and congressional, using both methods.
Correct. Correct.
Okay.
One of each, and then give it to the public to review and get
To
their
review.
input.
Got it. But, and then we all can all work on our own too, correct? I
Correct.
believe, because we
Correct.
can all submit up to one for drafting purposes.
Correct, correct. I'm just trying to see, I've always said about walking that middle line and not necessarily doing what's going to make everybody happy, but doing what everybody can live with. And I think if you give both sides of the conversation the ability to look and see what it would look like, at least we're attempting to work for everybody. And I think they will appreciate that. And that's just my opinion.
Got it. Commissioner Clark?
Yes. Well, let me make this comment first, and then I got another one. We had voted as a recommendation that all maps be started from scratch. However, looking at existing data as well for comparison purposes. So I think it's a matter of how we define comparison purposes. Whether we create a whole separate map, series of maps like Rhonda suggests, or we just look at the existing one and compare it to the one we started from scratch. It could go either way. The only problem I have with what Rhonda just mentioned, I mean, I would support it if we had the time, but do we have the time to do 2 complete sets? Yeah, rather than do the one set like we talked about from scratch and then compare it to the existing map, which I think is, from a time perspective and efficiency perspective, is probably a better approach.
Again, I mean, just as far as recommendations go, I mean, I don't see the harm in bringing this up to all of us again, and saying, hey, you know, we have the recommendations to start from scratch, but we also thought about doing it this way per, you know, public perception, and, you know, doing it both directions. Because I mean, I have a feeling that the one adjusting the maps that are from their current position is probably going to go a lot quicker than starting from scratch anyway. But Rhonda, go ahead. I mean, I'm on the fence on this one, but.
Okay, I'm just going to put forth the motion then. I don't know, Julianne, does that mean amending the original motion done on Friday, or can I make a whole separate motion? Could you advise me, please?
Yes, through the chair to Commissioner Lang, that would be, that motion has already been voted on and settled. So this would be a new motion that, if adopted, would either modify or nullify that original action that was taken at the first committee meeting. Is that clear?
Clear. Then I would like to move that we recommend to the full committee that we do 2 sets of maps one map consisting of starting from scratch with the lines and one map consisting of the original lines and adjusting them for communities of interest and obvious gerrymandered places.
In addition, correct, to what we've been basically said for, I guess, is it nullifying or replacing, or are we handling both?
Julianne just said that it would replace, I believe. Isn't that what you said? I'm fine with in addition, but if this one replaces the other, I don't know how. I
Well,
mean,
I think
go ahead, Julianne.
I apologize. Please finish.
No, I'm finished. I need to hear from you.
Well, I think the action taken in the first committee meeting was that the maps would all be started from scratch. So this would definitely supersede and replace that original action. The original action was all maps be started from scratch, and then the existing data would be looked at for the existing lines and have a comparison based on that. That was the motion adopted at the last meeting. So this would be a substantial difference from that original recommendation to the commission. What the committee could do is have alternate options. So this could be a second recommendation or an alternate recommendation that could be put forward to the commission if that would be another way that this could be approached. So an alternate recommendation to the all maps starting from scratch that was previously adopted. Thank you.
Okay, I'll put the motion as an alternate recommendation then to clarify that.
I will second that motion. Any discussion on the motion to have an additional recommendation to draw two sets of map, one map starting from fresh, one map using the original lines and adjusting for communities of interest and obvious gerrymandering? Okay, seeing none, now we'll vote on the motion. Again, the motion is that we have an additional recommendation to draw two sets of maps, one map starting from fresh, one set of maps starting from fresh, one set of maps using the original district lines and adjusting them for communities of interest and obvious gerrymandering. All in favor of the motion, please raise your right hand and say aye. Aye. All opposed, please raise your right hand and say nay.
Nay.
Aye, nay.
Okay, so 2-2, that would be a failure, correct, Julianne?
That is correct. That motion failed.
Okay. Any further discussion in general before we go into the, I can't read right now, hold on. Continue to develop options and recommendations for repetitive processes. Commissioner Lang.
Sorry, no, I answered my own question.
Okay. Commissioner Eid, I thought I saw your hand come up too for a second. No? Anything further, Commissioner Clark? Okay, so the next part of new business for B3 is the recommendation for repetitive process. And I believe this is your flow chart, I would imagine, Doug, because it does go through repetition on how we would handle things. Do you want to go over that real fast to see what everyone's thoughts are?
Can probably do it in 5 minutes. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. Well, I do want to make the comment. I'm going to share the screen and bring it up. I do want to make the comment that I did this. Hold on, I'm trying to find it on my shared screen. Oh, here it is. I did this based on our discussion the other day. Can everybody see that?
It's small, but yeah, hold on.
Let me see if I can make it bigger somehow. I don't know how to do that.
Plus sign right in the middle bar. next to the
Oh,
hangout.
yeah, I got it. Yeah, that is. That a little better?
Yep.
Okay. I did this based on our conversation the other day, and there's a couple areas.
Hold on one second, Commissioner Clark. Ms. Reinhardt.
Hi, Commissioners. Apologies for the interruption, Commissioner Clark. I just wanted to specify that while the agenda lists the concluding time as, I believe, 12 p.m., this meeting is noticed until 2 p.m. So 2 p.m. is our final time for today.
Thank you for that. Go ahead and continue, Commissioner Clark.
So this is based off of our conversation, I think it was Friday. And there was a previous flow chart that I know that Kim had saw and Bruce saw and all of you saw that I think you should disregard because this is a little different. So I used Visio and I used one of the techniques they have in there. So a lot of these decisions I think have been made. So we start the process off. Oh, let me say one other thing. This thing is very repetitive. So we finish a region, we go back to the start. We decide to quit a region, we go back to the start and choose another region and so forth. So it's like never ending until we get completely done. So we start off, we as a commission select Congress, state Senate, or state House to deal with. Okay, and this is done generically because we're going to start with the Senate if the commission agrees, but we eventually will go to the state House, we'll eventually go to the congressional. And we select the region that we're going to work with, okay? And then the communities of interest are going to be identified for that region. And that identification is going to take place a number of ways when one of these has to be adjusted. First one, the automated COI will be displayed. EDS can do that for us for that region. The regional expert, and that's the part that needs to be further defined. We may not use a regional expert. Leads the discussion per the public comments, and then the discussion's documented, cataloged, and put in the document repository. Again, we may not want to document it because we've decided only to document major events, and right now we're in the design phase for that region. So once that's complete, then we get to a decision point. Does this meet the racially polarized criteria? I'm sorry, hold on. Okay, the EDS draws or adjusts the preliminary district boundaries per the commission guidance. Okay, so we do that. EDS applies the COI to the district per the commission direction, and that may already be done. And this discussion is documented, cataloged, and put in a document repository. And we may decide not to do that because it's a major change, and I don't think we've gotten to any changes yet. And then at that point, we move on to another page and start at point A. Okay, so let me go down to that. Okay, so then we've got the district defined. We've got the COI defined. And then we asked Dr. Hanley to provide the MICRC report and recommendation based on her. And she does that through an analysis and recommendation documented, cataloged, and put in her document repository. After that point, there's a decision point that's made. Does this meet the racially polarized category or criteria? And if it does, we move forward. If it does not, we finalize why it's document, why it's not, and for the scenario, and put in the document repository and go back to C. And C, which is on the first page, was we redraw the preliminary district and start over again. And if it does, then we go to Bruce, and we may do a different order between Dr. Hanley and Bruce, but Bruce will provide the MICRC report and recommendation, and then he'll do that. He'll document it and keep it in his repository. Does this meet the VRA criteria? If it does not, we go back and redraw a district or adjust a district. It's redraw or adjust. Okay, and then we'll recycle back through that once we do that adjustment. So after Bruce's recommendation, we put the district scenario in a repository for consideration. And so we feel it's a good district at this point. It meets the criteria, and we may move forward with it. We may not. We may come back and adjust it at some point. Is the region scenarios complete? And no, then we need to continue with the region, go back to C, select another district, and begin to work on that. If it is complete, we need to analyze the entire region and make adjustments if necessary. And if we concur and we don't concur, we go back and start again. And if we do concur, we then finalize the documentation catalog and put it in a data repository. Then the question becomes, are all the regions complete for the state? The answer is yes. Then we do a final review of the state map, and we'll complete it. And if we concur as a group, then we're done. If not, we go back and start again and make adjustments. Are all the regions complete? No. And we go back to D, and D is on the first page, and that restarts another region to take another look at. So it's just a complete repetitive process until we get all the regions done. For the state Senate, they would go through the same process for the Congress and the state House. So that's what I put together based on what we discussed. So that would be the work process. So I'd like to get some comments based on that. I'm going to leave this up while we talk. I know everybody's not familiar with flowcharts, and it's pretty detailed, so you may not have comments at this point. But that defines how we would work and who's involved at what points, and what's the criteria for being completed with a region or a district, and moving on to the Congress or the State House. So that was just one way of documenting it. We could do other ways of documenting it rather than flowcharts. It's up to subcommittee's decision on how to do that.
This might be overkill. Is there anything in here that would have the proper pathway on how to get the information to everybody that needs it for their analysis purposes?
No.
Now, granted, most of it's going to be in the software.
It's going to be in the software. I thought about that when I was doing this, Dustin. That's going to be in the software. The data that Lisa uses or Bruce uses is going to be, through the software, through their programs or whatever, however they do that. So I didn't define that, because particularly for Lisa and Bruce, they have their own way of analyzing things. Yeah. So no. And let me go down here. EDS draws or adjusts preliminary district boundaries for the commission guidance. That's a discussion. So there's no way to document a discussion. And we may say, we want to move this here, move this there, and do the discussion. And there's so many variables on how to do that. You just can't document it in a flow.
Got it.
So anyways, that's what I tossed together. And I know there's some small changes that need to be made, but I mean, I'm open to any type of way we document the process that we use. I don't care. We don't have to use this method. I want to get us off a blank piece of paper.
It's definitely a good organizational strategy on how to start, for sure.
Right.
Mr. Brace?
Well, I think so, and not everybody may, but
Yeah, I think what Commissioner Doug has outlined is a good starting point. The only additional piece that I would add to it was what Lisa has already talked about, and it's kind of getting before it's after start and before selecting. From your standpoint, Lisa is going to do some overall analysis initially and give you some ideas in terms of problem areas within the state or things you need to be cognizant within the state. And so that information comes up on the front end that then you utilize as you go through the process. And yes, Doug is right. You know, Lisa comes in at the tail end also, but I want to make sure that people understand that Lisa's got a role initially to give you kind of some overall assessments of where there should be concerns.
Good, nice, good point. Is there significance when they get down to analyzing a district, whether Lisa provides her input first or Bruce does?
I think what you'll end up seeing is that you'll get a feel as you move along that, okay, Lisa's more focused on this set of data. And so as we're drawing, we can have that set of data up there on the spreadsheet. So you'll be able to see, you know, as we're drawing, okay, this is Lisa said is one concern, and we need to look at these reconstituted election results for this contest in this area. And you'll be able to see as we bring in a township or take out a township or a precinct, you'll see that change. And is it possible to get those changes enough so that in that contest, the African-American candidate finally wins? That's kind of an experiment going back and forth of taking a precinct in, putting it out, you know, whatever the case may be, different scenarios in terms of drawing, but seeing as you're drawing, what are those numbers, both in terms of, you know, do we have it over 50% or not in terms of a minority seat, for example, as well as how does it perform? All of that is what is part of Lisa's analysis, but you'll be able to see some of that in real time as we're going through it too.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, I appreciate the comments. Does the flow look okay to you, Kim?
Yeah, no, I thought it was well documented and a good flow on that side. I just want to make sure that, you know, Lisa's initial analysis is up front on that side.
That needs to be added, yeah.
Right.
If we go this approach.
And I think what's also important, kind of going at what Kim said, that once information is put up on a screen, you know, I'm sure Lisa and I can have, and certainly from my perspective, a preliminary idea of where you're going, and that will change, as Kim said, as you add this township or that township. So this is all very fluid, and I think it's just important to realize that as you are putting things up on the screen and beginning to move things around, the numbers change, the percentages change, minority population changes, perhaps the extent of polarized voting changes. So all of that comes up very fluidly in real time.
So this section here where we draw or adjust a district, okay, then that's followed by whatever Lisa does or whatever you do.
Well, I think that's true, but I also want to make the point that, you know, I may have something to say earlier than that. And I know that, I know this is a very flexible flow chart, and I agree with Kim. I think that it's a good way of approaching it, but I expect with the districts that, implicate the issues that we've discussed, that I could have ongoing thoughts and opinions and suggestions as you move through this flowchart.
Yes, and so what I probably should do is write down here, change this to, for commission guidance or commission or vendor guidance, really, as we go through this. Because, yeah, at any point in time, you may want to jump in.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think that's, I expect that we'd probably both be so inclined, and that's
Right.
part of the process.
yeah, I think so, I think so too. So I think when you get to this point here, when we're having the discussion, that would include the vendors as well. Yeah, okay.
Now, I would add, if that is where we're going, keep that in mind. And it kind of goes counter to what I said before, that we could have 3 teams running at the same time. That makes it kind of impossible for Lisa and Bruce to be monitoring these all 3 and 3 different monitors on their computer or something like that. So be cognizant of that in terms of just time and how you're allocating, when do we work on this region or something like that too.
Yeah, so that's more of a timing issue than a process issue, because the process would be the same.
Right.
Correct. So yeah, so anyways, I'd like to get Rhonda's and Anthony's and Dustin's comments as well.
Go to general counsel first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just very, very briefly, I also wanted to note that another thing that'll be contributing to the dynamic process in the iterative process is that you're going to continue to receive not only public comment and public feedback, but also potential new communities of interest as you're engaging in the process. So I think, again, it's very dynamic. I don't think anyone is suggesting that it's a linear one and done kind of a situation, but I did just want to highlight that you will be continuing to receive public comment and potential communities of interest throughout the process. Thank you.
Dr. Handley, followed.
Yeah, I don't know how to display that on this, other than we automate the COI being displayed. So whenever the data gets updated, next time we display it, it'll be updated data.
No, Commissioner Clark, I think you captured the cycle very clearly, and that it's a continual cycle and loop, not only for regions, but within a region. Thank you.
Dr. Handley, followed by Commissioner E.
I can't see the diagram very well. I'm on my laptop.
This is only part of it.
I don't see the end. What I'm wondering is, when you can't assess a plan for political fairness until you have a whole plan. So and I didn't see that at the end stage of a plan, whether you assessed it for political fairness. I have the pictures. Pictures are over this diagram. I just don't have this.
Let me see if I can get down there. Let me see if I can get down to the end. So we'll get down to the end, and we've reviewed the final state map. Is that when you would want to review it for fairness at that point? Or prior?
Well, you can't review a plan for fairness without having all of the districts in place. So you wouldn't do it for a region. I mean, because let's say you go to the Upper Peninsula and you do an analysis and you're saying those districts favor Republicans, but it's for obvious reasons because mostly Republican up there. So you'd actually need to do an assessment of the plan as a whole. I mean,
So that would happen after all the regions are complete.
I think so, yes.
First.
And again, you'd want to think about, in a lot of countries, partisan fairness is really, you don't have any political data and you ensure that the people who are drawing the boundaries are civil servants with no political affiliation at all. And that's enough. But mostly here in the United States, you have to think about how you're going to make sure that you can say that this plan is politically fair.
Okay,
So I think I would
so
add that as a step at the end.
right here at the end, once we get all the regions done for one segment, that segment being congressional or state house or state senate, then you would do a fairness assessment.
Using a whole variety of measures, yes, but
Yeah,
I think
whatever.
at least in your constitution, I think you have to do it.
Okay, that's fine. I can add it. That's a good point.
Commissioner Reed.
Yeah, I really like this flow chart. There are a few things that I specifically like about it. Because coming into this, I wanted the goal to be to try to create a process that is repeatable, but also leaves room for creativity from the commissioners to do what we're tasked with doing. And I think by and large, it does that. It's a dynamic flow chart rather than static, meaning it's not only one direction. There are a lot of things that loop back on themselves, which is exactly the way I think we need to go about it. So yeah, I think this is great.
So
Mr.
I
Grace? Oh, go ahead. I'm
no,
sorry.
go ahead, Kim.
I don't know if his hand's still up from earlier or not.
Oh yeah, it might be.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, sorry, that was from earlier. Let me lower it.
Oh, it's
Sorry
fine.
about that.
Okay. So,
And with you,
Dustin,
and-
I think the question is, given some modifications to this, do we want to bring this to the commission? Or do we want to use some alternative form of documentation of the process?
I mean, I'm a very visual type of person anyway. So see, I'm in all sorts of favor of something like this to outline a process. And you've done a very, very, very good job and basically hit all the points minus the two that we just discussed.
Yeah, the two dealing with Lisa at the beginning and then at the end of the process. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, and then even
And
my
I
question.
think I think the other thing, Dustin, is that as you start opening this up to more commissioners' input, you may find some other little changes here or there. But I think it's a good starting point for at least bringing to the commission. This is kind of the process that we're initially thinking about, but certainly we want all of you to comment on it, kind of thing.
Yeah, and there's no reason that once we get into doing redistricting, if we find a flaw in this, we can adjust it and roll it out that way too. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Commissioner Ede.
I just forgot to lower the hand.
Commissioner Lang, what are your thoughts?
Be honest, I really don't have many on it. I mean, everybody views things differently. I don't know. I don't have any opinion on it, really. He put a lot of thought into it, you can tell. It does state stuff, but I don't know. I guess it'll be up for the full commission to decide.
I think it needs an explanation upfront that this is the general concept, and then walk through the flow chart with them so that they understand the general concept and how we're continuously reoccurring on things and so forth.
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, you want that feedback loop. What you don't want to have happen is it basically destroy itself, and then you start cherry picking where you're going after, because then you're just going to be digging yourself a bigger hole faster than you can even think about digging yourself out of it.
Correct.
So, but yeah, I like it. Are you making a motion?
I'm not making a motion, but I need to adjust it. And if somebody wants to make a motion to move it forward for commission review, that's fine.
Well, I'll motion to bring this plan as you amend it with the comments that Dr. Hanley said just now to the full commission, with the understanding that this is a starting point for the repeatable process that we can undertake going forward.
Correct. And I'll second that then.
All right, give me 1 second. I want to finish writing this down here. All right. All right, so the motion that moved and seconded is that we recommend that we utilize the flow chart with the changes suggested to the full commission for discussion as a starting point for our redistricting process. Is there any discussion on the motion? Commissioner Lang.
So this isn't necessarily the end product or that we're even going to use a flow sheet. This is strictly to get it to the commission.
Correct.
Okay.
I think one of the things it does, Rhonda, is that if anybody ever questions what we did, we can say we did it through a repeatable process. We did it the same way for every district. You know, and there should be no complaints of unfairness based on how we assess these things or what process we use. We didn't use one process for Detroit and another one for the UP. I think I lost my screen here. So I think that helps. Okay, that's the end of my comments.
Any further discussion on the motion? Ms. Reinhardt.
Yeah, apologies for the interruption. Commissioner Clark, if you could stop screen sharing during discussion and voting so that individuals watching via the live stream are able to view all participants during the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Pardon me, everybody. All right, as there's no more discussion on the motion, I will vote on the motion here. Again, is to recommend that we utilize the flow chart with changes suggested to the full commission for discussion as a starting point for the redistricting process. All in favor of the motion, please raise your right hand and say yay. Aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign, same nay. Seeing none, motion carries unanimously. We'll get that recommendation.
Point of order, Dustin.
Yes, sir.
What day are we bringing this to the full commission?
Wednesday.
Yeah, I believe it's
30th.
Wednesday.
Oh, Wednesday?
Yeah.
Okay, so I got to get these changes made before I travel. Okay.
We'll
Got
do
it.
it at the hotel. You're fine. All right. So
Yeah.
on the 30th. And I don't remember how long that meeting is. It's I think it's a couple of good hours. So we'll go over all of our recommendations and discussions.
The meeting is you noticed from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. on Wednesday.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. I lost my train of thought. I'm assuming you'll be there, Mr. Brace and Dr. Handley, on Wednesday?
Yes, I was planning on being there. I don't know what Lisa's schedule is.
That's fine. I was just asking. I mean, if not, that's fine. And what about you, Bruce?
Yeah, I think I spoke with Sue about that. I'll be available from 11 to 1.
All right. Well, Dr. Handley, if we see you, we see you. If we don't, we don't.
I'll be there until noon. I have a dissertation defense at noon, but I can be there in the morning.
Okay, excellent. All right.
Point of order, Dustin.
Yep.
Could I ask Lisa a question? Do you prefer to be called Dr. Hanley or Lisa?
Lisa.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was trying to be
Gotcha.
formal
Okay.
with everybody.
All right. Thank you.
All right. I'll make that note. Okay. Well, I believe that's the end of new business. So is there anything else anybody would like to bring up or say at this particular point in time? Okay. Commissioner Eden.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think about how I want to word this question because we have a little bit more time left, so it's good. I guess my question is regarding reaching a consensus at the end of this process, so we need 2 people of each party, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, 2 independents, and 1 more to get majority to pass anything. However, I would like to have more consensus than that. I'm just wondering, based on your experiences in the past, what can be done to help all of us, become comfortable with the final product that we're going to end up making.
This might be a question for Julianne, but can we even do that since those requirements are in the Constitution that we need 2, 2, and 2?
Mr. Chair.
I'm not saying like what's required is what's required, but I want personally, even though we don't have to, I would like to see us have more consensus than that. So that's what the question is, just helping build that consensus. If there's any advice.
Commissioner Lang.
I've got advice. How about compromise? That's what we all have to end up doing in the end, I think, is compromising. We're not all going to be happy, I'm sure. Just like all of the public aren't going to be happy. I think our main goal in getting there is going to be how well we are willing to compromise with each other. Just my opinion. I don't know, maybe some of the experts have experience with that.
I mean, that's what this is going to be, right? Based on all the public comment anyway, it's all compromising for the most part because we're not going to make everybody happy. We'll make everybody equally upset. And then you did a good job. That's what I always like to say. So, Mr. Brace.
Those are exactly my words. It is a matter of compromise. We'll see how strident people could become on that side, but clearly I think the goal for all of us would be try to figure out how to compromise and how to give everybody a little bit, but not the entire kitchen sink, because nobody can have the entire kitchen sink. Some people don't want to think that that's the way it ultimately would be, but certainly that's my experience. You gotta find the 50% plus 1 votes in order to pass something.
Excuse me, and I agree with that. I just add that there are going to be some immutable realities with the legal requirements that really don't necessarily lend themselves to, well, we'll do this and I'll give you that. There will be some districts where I'm sure that will happen. But I think that as we move forward and as we talk more, there are just some bottom line realities that really can't change. But that's not going to be true with, every district in every manner. But I also think from a working standpoint, with everyone having buy-in, everyone participating, everyone being on board with the process that you're talking about, I think that goes a long way to helping build consensus. In my experience, when folks feel alienated or feel as if their views aren't being supported or acknowledged, they're not feeling that they have been given full and fair opportunity to participate. But, the law is not necessarily elastic. It can be up to a point, but there are other points where there's really not much that can be done.
And then,
But it is a kind of a question of having access for anybody and everybody. And you're
Sure.
certainly along that way much further than states that I've worked in, on that side. So you should be congratulated for moving in that direction, but keep that in mind through the whole process, because that openness is what's certainly people up in Michigan are going to be looking for, because we've heard them say that, but it is part of the way of getting the compromise.
and then just my personal belief on the whole matter is, I've known all of you for almost a year now, and we've all been able to work together for the most part. We're not really, and we haven't really done the nitty gritty yet, but as far as everything else that we've been doing, I feel like everybody that is on this commission has respect for everybody, and that there will be, reasons why we're going to have to compromise or respectfully disagree, but that's just all part of the process anyway. Everyone's going to get along just fine, and I think we're going to put the best thing forward that we can. That's my opinion. That's my personal opinion, and I'm willing to bet that at the end of the day, once we get the maps all drawn, it's not going to be 2, 2, and 2. It's going to be 13 voting yes for it. That's my personal belief.
Be cognizant that along the way, you're going to have a lot of people saying, hey, do it my way, or hey, we should do it this way or that way. Just be cognizant that's coming.
Right, of course. Oh, I'm sure it will. And then it's like, well, let me show you my way. And then, and then like, okay, now let's do it 50-50. Oh, look at that. Now we have our way. See, there we go. Okay, anything else from anybody? Okay, seeing nothing at this particular point, then without objection, I'll move to section 6 on our agenda, which is to adjourn. Can I get a motion, or I look favorably on a motion to adjourn at this particular point? Commissioner Lang.
Before we adjourn, can we just thank all of our vendors for being with us again and giving us the information that you have? We really do appreciate your time. We know it's valuable. Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And then I'll
you.
move to adjourn.
Moved by Commissioner Lang, seconded by Commissioner Clark. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none. Motion to adjourn we'll vote on at this point. All in favor, please raise your right hand and say yay. Or aye. All opposed say no and raise the same sign. All right. Thanks everybody for attending today. The meeting is adjourned at 12:24 p.m. on the 28th of June. Have a good safe travels to everybody going to Muskegon, and I'll see you folks on Tuesday or tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.